"I muckle owe your opinion, Captain," said Dandy odd this bed looks, as if a the colliers in Sanquhar had been int thegither, "but it'll no win through my muckle coat." So saying, he flung himself upon the frail bed with a force that made all its timbers crack, and in a few moments gave audible signal that he was fast asleep. Bertram slipped off his coat and boots, and occupied the other dormitory. The strangeness of his destiny, and the mysteries which appeared to thicken around him, while he seemed alike to be persecuted and protected by secret enemies and friends, arising out of a class of people with whom he had no previous connection for some time, occupied his thoughts. Fatigue, however, gradually composed his mind, and in a short time he was as fast asleep as his companion. And in this comfortable state of oblivion we must leave them until we acquaint the reader with some other circumstances which occurred about the same period. Chapter Roman 46. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Speak, I charge you. Macbeth. Upon the evening of the day when Bertram's examination had taken place, Colonel Mannering arrived at Woodbourne from Edinburgh. He found his family in their usual state, which probably, so far as Julia was concerned, would not have been the case had she learned the news of Bertram's arrest. But as during the Colonel's absence the two young ladies lived much retired, this circumstance fortunately had not reached Woodbourne. A letter had already made Miss Bertram acquainted with the downfall of the expectations which had been formed upon the bequest of her kinswoman. Whatever hopes that news might have dispelled the disappointment did not prevent her from joining her friend in affording a cheerful reception to the Colonel, to whom she thus endeavoured to express the deep sense she entertained of his paternal kindness. She touched on her regret that at such a season of the year he should have made upon her account a journey so fruitless. "That it was fruitless to you, my dear," said the Colonel, "I do most deeply lament, but for my own share I have made some valuable acquaintances, and have spent the time I have been absent in Edinburgh with peculiar satisfaction, so that on that score there is nothing to be regretted. Even our friend, the Dominie, is returned thrice the man he was from having sharpened his wits in controversy with the geniuses of the northern metropolis." "Of a surety," said the Dominie with great complacency, "I did wrestle, and was not overcome, though my adversary was cunning in his art." "I presume," said Miss Mannering, "the conquest was somewhat fatiguing Mr. Sampson." "Very much, young lady, howbeit I girded up my loins and strove against him." "I can bear witness," said the Colonel, "I never saw an affair better contested. The enemy was like the Mahratta cavalry. He assailed on all sides, and presented no fair mark for artillery, but Mr. Sampson stood to his guns notwithstanding, and fired away now upon the enemy, and now upon the dust which he had raised. But we must not fight our battles over again tonight. Tomorrow we shall have the whole at breakfast." The next morning at breakfast, however, the Dominie did not make his appearance. He had walked out. A servant said early in the morning it was so common for him to forget his meals that his absence never deranged the family. The housekeeper, a decent old-fashioned Presbyterian matron, having as such the highest respect for Sampson's theological acquisitions, had it in charge on these occasions to take care that he was no sufferer by his absence of mind, and therefore usually waylaid him on his return to remind him of his sublunary wants, and to minister to their relief. It seldom, however, happened that he was absent from 2 meals together, as was the case in the present instance. We must explain the cause of this unusual occurrence. The conversation which Mr. Pleydell had held with Mr. Mannering on the subject of the loss of Harry Bertram had awakened all the painful sensations which that event had inflicted upon Sampson. The affectionate heart of the poor Dominie had always reproached him that his negligence in leaving the child in the care of Frank Kennedy had been the proximate cause of the murder of the one, the loss of the other, the death of Mrs. Bertram, and the ruin of the family of his patron. It was a subject which he never conversed upon, if indeed his mode of speech could be called conversation at any time, but it was often present to his imagination. The sort of hope so strongly affirmed and asserted in Mrs. Bertram's last settlement had excited a corresponding feeling in the Dominie's bosom, which was exasperated into a sort of sickening anxiety by the discredit with which Pleydell had treated it. Assuredly, thought Sampson to himself, he is a man of erudition and well skilled in the weighty matters of the law, but he is also a man of humorous levity and inconsistency of speech, and wherefore should he pronounce ex cathedra, as it were on the hope expressed by worthy Madam Margaret Bertram of Singleside. All this, I say, the Dominie thought to himself, for had he uttered half the sentence his jaws would have ached for a month under the unusual fatigue of such a continued exertion. The result of these cogitations was a resolution to go and visit the scene of the tragedy at Warrock Point, where he had not been for many years, not indeed since the fatal accident had happened. The walk was a long one, for the point of Warrock lay on the farther side of the Ellengowan property, which was interposed between it and Woodbourne. Besides, the Dominie went astray more than once, and met with brooks swollen into torrents by the melting of the snow, where he, honest man, had only the summer recollection of little trickling rills. At length, however, he reached the woods which he had made the object of his excursion, and traversed them with care, muddling his disturbed brains with vague efforts to recall every circumstance of the catastrophe. It will readily be supposed that the influence of local situation and association was inadequate to produce conclusions different from those which he had formed under the immediate pressure of the occurrences themselves. With many a weary sigh, therefore, and many a groan, the poor Dominie returned from his hopeless pilgrimage, and weariedly plodded his way towards Woodbourne, debating at times in his altered mind a question which was forced upon him by the cravings of an appetite rather of the keenest, namely whether he had breakfasted that morning or no. It was in this twilight humour, now thinking of the loss of the child, then involuntarily compelled to meditate upon the somewhat incongruous subject of hung beef rolls and butter, that his route, which was different from that which he had taken in the morning, conducted him past the small ruin tower, or rather vestige of a tower called by the country people the Kaim of Dernclug. The reader may recollect the description of this ruin in the 27th chapter of this narrative, as the vault in which young Bertram, under the auspices of Meg Merrilies, witnessed the death of Hatteraick's lieutenant. The tradition of the country added ghostly terrors to the natural awe inspired by the situation of this place, which terrors the gypsies who so long inhabited the vicinity had probably invented, or at least propagated for their own advantage. It was said that during the times of the Galwegian independence, one Hanlon Mac Dingawaya, brother to the reigning chief North Mac Dingawaya, murdered his brother and sovereign in order to usurp the principality from his infant nephew, and that being pursued for vengeance by the faithful allies and retainers of the house, who espoused the cause of the lawful heir, he was compelled to retreat with a few followers whom he had involved in his crime to his impregnable tower called the Kaim of Dernclug, where he defended himself until nearly reduced by famine, when, setting fire to the place, he and the small remaining garrison desperately perished by their own swords, rather than fall into the hands of their exasperated enemies. This tragedy, which, considering the wild times wherein it was placed, might have some foundation in truth, was larded with many legends of superstition and diablerie, so that most of the peasants of the neighbourhood, if benighted, would rather have chosen to make a considerable circuit than pass these haunted walls. The lights often seen around the tower, when used as the rendezvous of the lawless characters, by whom it was occasionally frequented, were accounted for under authority of these tales of witchery, in a manner at once convenient for the private parties concerned and satisfactory to the public. Now it must be confessed that our friend Sampson, although a profound scholar and mathematician, had not travelled so far in philosophy as to doubt the reality of witchcraft or apparitions, born, indeed, at a time when a doubt in the existence of witches was interpreted as equivalent to a justification of their infernal practices. A belief of such legends had been impressed upon the Dominie as an article indivisible from his religious faith, and perhaps it would have been equally difficult to have induced him to doubt the one as the other with these feelings. And in a thick misty day, which was already drawing to its close, Dominie Sampson did not pass the Kaim of Dernclug without some feelings of tacit horror. What then was his astonishment, when on passing the door, that door, which was supposed to have been placed there by one of the latter lairds of Ellengowan, to prevent presumptuous strangers from incurring the dangers of the haunted vault, that door, supposed to be always locked, and the key of which was popularly said to be deposited with the presbyter at that very door opened suddenly, and the figure of Meg Merrilies, well known, though not seen for many a revolving year, was placed at once before the eyes of the startled Dominie. She stood immediately before him in the footpath, confronting him so absolutely that he could not avoid her, except by fairly turning back, which his manhood prevented him from thinking of. "I ken ye wad be here," she said with her harsh and hollow voice. "I ken wha ye seek, but ye maun do my bidding." "Get thee behind me," said the alarmed Dominie. "Avoid ye conjuro t celestissimane quissimus persisimane equissima." Atk miserum conjuro t. Meg stood her ground against this tremendous volley of superlatives, which Sampson hawked up from the pit of his stomach, and hurled at her in thunder. "Is the carl daft?" she said. "Why his glamour?" "Conjuro," continued the Dominie, "abjuro contesta, atk viriliter impero tibi." What in the name of Sathan are ye feared for why your French gibberish that would make a dog sick listen, ye stick it stibbler, a broken down clerical probationer to what I tell ye, or ye soul rue it, while there's a limb o' ye hings to another tell Colonel Mannering that I ken he's seeking me he kens, and I ken that the blood will be wiped out, and the lost will be found. And Bertram's right and Bertram's MLGHT shall meet on Ellengowan Height. Hey, there's a letter to him, I was gone to send it in another way I canna write mysel, but I hae them that will baith write and read and ride and rin for me tell him the time's coming now, and the weird's dreed the destiny is fulfilled, and the wheels turning bid him look at the stars as he has looked at them, before will ye mind at this. Assuredly, said the Dominie, I am dubious for woman, I am perturbed at thy words, and my flesh quakes to hear thee. Thale do you nae ill though, and may be muckle gude. Avoid ye, I desire no good that comes by unlawful means. Fullybody that thou art, said Meg, stepping up to him, with a frown of indignation, that made her dark eyes flash like lamps from under her bent brows. Fullybody, if I meant ye rang couldna I clawed hurl, ye o'er that craig steep rock and wadman ken, how ye cam by your end mair than Frank Kennedy hear ye, that ye Warwickhow scarecrow. In the name of all that is good, said the Dominie, recoiling, and pointing his long pewter-headed walking cane, like a javelin at the supposed sorceressin, the name of all that is good bide off hands, I will not be handled, woman, stand off upon thine own proper peril, desist, I say I am stronglow, I will resist. Here his speech was cut short, for Meg, armed with supernatural strength, as the Dominie asserted, broke in upon his guard, put by a thrust, which he made at her with his cane, and lifted him into the vault, as easily said he as I could sway a kitchen's atlas. Sit down there, she said, pushing the half-throttled preacher with some violence against a broken chair. Sit down there, and gather your wind and your senses, ye black barrowtram, limo the kirk that ye are ye foo or fasting? Fasting from all but sin, answered the Dominie, who, recovering his voice, and finding his exorcisms only served to exasperate the intractable sorceress, thought it best to affect complacence and submission, inwardly conning over however the wholesome conjurations, which he durst no longer utter aloud. But as the Dominie's brain was by no means equal to carry on two trains of ideas at the same time, a word or two of his mental exercise sometimes escaped, and mingled with his uttered speech, in a manner ludicrous enough, especially as the poor man shrunk himself together, after every escape of the kind, from terror of the effect it might produce upon the irritable feelings of the witch. Meg in the meanwhile went to a great black cauldron that was boiling on a fire on the floor, and lifting the lid, an odour was diffused through the vault, which, if the vapours of a witch's cauldron could in aught be trusted, promised better things than the hellbroth, which such vessels are usually supposed to contain. It was in fact the savour of a goodly stew composed of fowls' hairs, partridges and moorgame boiled in a large mess with potatoes, onions and leeks, and from the size of the cauldron appeared to be prepared for 6 people, at least, so ye hae eat neathing a day, said Meg, heaping a large portion of this mess into a brown dish, and strewing it savourily with salt and pepper. We must again have recourse to the contribution to Blackwood's Magazine, April 1817. To the admirers of good eating gypsy cookery, seems to have little to recommend it. I can assure you, however, that the cook of a nobleman of high distinction, a person who never reads even a novel without an eye to the enlargement of the culinary science, has added to the Almanac des Gourmands certain potage à la Meg Merrilies de Dernclough, consisting of game and poultry of all kinds, stewed with vegetables into a soup, which rivals in savour and richness the gallant messes of Comatra's wedding, and which the Baron of Bradwardine would certainly have reckoned among the epulae lautiers. The artist alluded to in this passage in Mons Florence Cook, to Henry and Charles, late Dukes of Buccleuch, and of high distinction in his profession. Nothing, answered the Dominie Celestisimathat, iscued wife. Hey, then, said she, placing the dish before him, there's what will warm your heart. I do not hungermail for Cathet, is to say Mrs. Merrilies, for he said unto himself, the savour is sweet, but it bath been cooked by a Canidia or an Eric though. If ye dinna eat instantly and put some salt in ye by the bread, and the salt ill put it down your throat, why the cutty short spoon scalding as it is, and whether ye will or no gape sinner and swallow. Sampson, afraid of eye of newt and toe of frog, tigers, shorens, and so forth, had determined not to venture, but the smell of the stew was fast melting his obstinacy, which flowed from his chops as it were in streams of water, and the witch's threats decided him to feed hunger and fear, are excellent casuists. Saul said hunger feasted with the witch of Endor, and quoth fear the salt which she sprinkled upon the food showeth plainly, it is not a necromantic banquet, in which that seasoning never occurs, and besides, says hunger, after the first spoonful it is savoury and refreshing viands. So ye like the meat, said the hostess. Yea, answered the Dominie, and I give thee thanks, alo Ratisimahich, means Mrs. Margaret. I will eat your fill, but an ye kenned how it was gotten ye may be wadna like it. Sae Wheel Sampson's spoon dropped in the act of conveying its load to his mouth. There's been money a moonlight watch to bring a that trade thegither, continued Meg. Th folk that are to eat that dinner thought little o' your game laws. Is that all, thought Sampson, resuming his spoon and shovelling away manfully. I will not lack my food upon that argument. Now ye maun tak a dram. I will, quoth Sampson conjuro tethat, is I thank you heartily, for he thought to himself, in for a penny, in for a pound. And he fairly drank the witch's health in a cupful of brandy. When he had put this copestone upon Meg's good cheer, he felt, as he said, mightily elevated, and afraid of no evil which could befall unto him. Will ye remember my errand now, said Meg Merrilies. I ken, by the cast o' your that ye're another man than when you came in. I will, Mrs. Margaret, repeated Sampson stoutly. I will deliver unto him the sealed epistle, and will add what you please to send by word of mouth. Then ill make it short, says Meg. Tell him to look at the stars without fail this night, and to do what I desire him in that letter as he would wish. That Bertram's right and Bertram's might should meet on Ellangowan height. I have seen him twice, when he saw na me I ken, when he was in this country first, and I ken what's brought him back again up into the gate ye're o'er lang here follow me. Sampson followed the Sibyl accordingly, who guided him about 1/4 of a mile through the woods, by a shorter cut than he could have found for himself. They then entered upon the common, Meg still marching before him at a great pace, until she gained the top of a small hillock which overhung the road. Here, she said, stand still here, look how the setting sun breaks through yon cloud that's been darkening the lift a day. See, where the first stream o' light facets upon Donegild's round tower, th' oldest tower in the castle o' Ellangowan, that's no for neathing. See, as it's glooming too. Seaward abune yon sloop in the bay, that's no for neathing neither. Here I stood on this very spot, said she, drawing herself up so as not to lose one hairbreadth of her uncommon height, and stretching out her long sinewy arm and clenched hand. Here I stood when I told the last Laird o' Ellangowan what was coming on his house, and did that far to the ground nate bit even o'er Serend. Here, where I break the wand of peace o'er him her, I stand again to bid God bless and prosper the just heir of Ellangowan, that will soon be brought to his ain, and the best laird he shall be that Ellangowan has seen for 300 years. Ill no live to see it maybe, but there will be money a blithe see it though mine be closed. And now, able Sampson, as ever ye load the house of Ellangowan, away why my message to the English colonel, as if life and death were upon your haste. So saying, she turned suddenly from the amazed Dominie, and regained with swift and long strides the shelter of the wood, from which she had issued at the point where it most encroached upon the common. Sampson gazed after her for a moment in utter astonishment, and then obeyed her direction, hurrying to Woodbourne at a pace very unusual for him, exclaiming 3 times, prodigious, prodigious, prodigious. Chapter Roman 47, It is not madness that I have uttered, bring me to the test, and I the matter will reword which madness would gamble from Hamlet. As Mr. Sampson crossed the hall with a bewildered look, Mrs. Allen, the good housekeeper, who with the reverent attention which is usually rendered to the clergy in Scotland, was on the watch for his return, sallied forth to meet him. What's this art now, Mr. Sampson? This is war than every I'll really do yourself some injury. Why these lang fastny things? Sae hurtful to the stamach, Mr. Sampson, if you would but put some peppermint draps in your pocket, or let Barnes cut ye a sandwich. Avoid thee, quoth the Dominie, his mind running still upon his interview with Meg Merrilies, and making for the dinning parlour. Now ye needna gang in there, the cloth's been removed an hour syne, and the colonel's at his wine, but just step into my room. I have a nice steak that the cook will do in a moment. Exercise o' tea, said Sampson, that is I have dined. Dined, it's impossible were, can ye hae dined why you that gangs out nae gate? With Beelzebub I believe, said the minister. Now then he's bewitched for certain, said the housekeeper, letting go her hold. He's bewitched or he's daft, and ony way the colonel maun just guide him his ain gate wheeze me hetch, so's it's a sair thing to see learning bring folk to this. And with this compassionate ejaculation she retreated into her own premises. The object of her commiseration had by this time entered the dinning parlour, where his appearance gave great surprise. He was mud up to the shoulders, and the natural paleness of his hue was twice as cadaverous as usual through terror, fatigue, and perturbation of mind. What on earth is the meaning of this, Mr. Sampson? Said Mannering, who observed Miss Bertram, looking much alarmed for her simple, but attached friend. Exorcissa, said the Dominie. How, sir, replied the astonished colonel. I crave pardon, honourable sir, but my wits are gone a wool-gathering, I think. Pray, Mr. Sampson, collect yourself, and let me know the meaning of all this. Sampson was about to reply, but finding his Latin formula of exorcism still came most readily to his tongue, he prudently desisted from the attempt, and put the scrap of paper which he had received from the gypsy into Mannering's hand, who broke the seal and read it with surprise. This seems to be some jest, he said, and a very dull one. It came from no jesting person, said Mr. Sampson. From whom then did it come? Demanded Mannering. The Dominie, who often displayed some delicacy of recollection, in cases where Miss Bertram had an interest, remembered the painful circumstances connected with Meg Merrilies, looked at the young ladies, and remained silent. We will join you at the tea table in an instant, Julia, said the colonel. I see that Mr. Sampson wishes to speak to me alone, and, now they are gone, what in heaven's name, Mr. Sampson, is the meaning of all this? It may be a message from heaven, said the Dominie, but it came by Beelzebub's postmistress. It was that witch Meg Merrilies, who should have been burned with a tar barrel 20 years since for a harlot, thief, witch, and gypsy. Are you sure it was? She, said the colonel with great interest. Sure, honoured sir, of a truth, she is one not to be forgotten, like Meg Merrilies, is not to be seen in any land. The colonel paced the room rapidly, cogitating with himself, to send out to apprehend her, but it is too distant to send to Macmorlan, and Sir Robert Haslewood is a pompous coxcomb, besides the chance of not finding her upon the spot, or that the humour of silence that seized her before may again return. Oh, I will not, to save being thought a fool, neglect the course she points out many of her class set out by being impostors and end by becoming enthusiasts, or hold a kind of darkling conduct between both lines, unconscious almost when they are cheating themselves, or when imposing on others. Well, my course is a plain one at any rate, and if my efforts are fruitless, it shall not be owing to over-jealousy of my own character for wisdom. With this he rang the bell, and ordering Barnes into his private sitting-room, gave him some orders with the result of which the reader may be made hereafter acquainted. We must now take up another adventure, which is also to be woven into the story of this remarkable day. Charles Haslewood had not ventured to make a visit at Woodbourne during the absence of the colonel. Indeed, Mannering's whole behaviour had impressed upon him an opinion that this would be disagreeable, and such was the ascendancy which the successful soldier and accomplished gentleman had attained over the young man's conduct, that in no respect would he have ventured to offend him. He saw, or thought he saw, in Colonel Mannering's general conduct an approbation of his attachment to Miss Bertram, but then he saw still more plainly the impropriety of any attempt at a private correspondence of which his parents could not be supposed to approve, and he respected this barrier interposed betwixt them both on Mannering's account, and as he was the liberal and zealous protector of Miss Bertram. No, said he to himself, I will not endanger the comfort of my Lucy's present retreat until I can offer her a home of her own. With this valorous resolution, which he maintained, although his horse from constant habit turned his head down the avenue of Woodbourne, and although he himself passed the lodge twice every day, Charles Haslewood withstood a strong inclination to ride down just to ask how the young ladies were, and whether he could be of any service to them during Colonel Mannering's absence. But on the second occasion he felt the temptation so severe that he resolved not to expose himself to it a third time, and contenting himself with sending hopes and inquiries, and so forth to Woodbourne, he resolved to make a visit long promised to a family at some distance, and to return in such time as to be one of the earliest among Mannering's visitors, who should congratulate his safe arrival from his distant and hazardous expedition to Edinburgh. Accordingly, he made out his visit, and having arranged matters so as to be informed within a few hours after Colonel Mannering reached home, he finally resolved to take leave of the friends with whom he had spent the intervening time, with the intention of dining at Woodbourne, where he was in a great measure domesticated. And this, for he thought much more deeply on the subject than was necessary, would, he flattered himself, appear a simple, natural, and easy mode of conducting himself. Fate, however, of which lovers make so many complaints, was in this case unfavourable to Charles Haslewood. His horse's shoes required an alteration, in consequence of the fresh weather having decidedly commenced. The lady of the house, where he was a visitor, chose to indulge in her own room till a very late breakfast hour. His friend also insisted on showing him a litter of puppies which his favourite pointer bitch had produced that morning. The colours had occasioned some doubts about the paternity, a weighty question of legitimacy, to the decision of which Haslewood's opinion was called in as arbiter between his friend and his groom, and which inferred in its consequences which of the litter should be drowned, which saved besides the laird himself, delayed our young lover's departure for considerable time, endeavouring with long and superfluous rhetoric to insinuate to Sir Robert Haslewood, through the medium of his son, his own particular ideas respecting the line of a meditated turnpike road. It is greatly to the shame of our young lover's apprehension that after the 10th reiterated account of the matter, he could not see the advantage to be obtained by the proposed road passing over the Langhurst Windenow, the Goodhouse Epoch Haleseycroft, and then crossing the river at Simon's Pool, and so by the road to Kippletringan, and the less eligible line pointed out by the English surveyor, which would go clear through the main enclosures at Haslewood, and cut within a mile or nearly so of the house itself, destroying the privacy and pleasure, as his informer contended, of the grounds. In short, the adviser, whose actual interest was to have the bridge built as near as possible to a farm of his own, failed in every effort to attract young Haslewood's attention, until he mentioned by chance that the proposed line was favoured by that fellow Glossin, who pretended to take a lead in the county. On a sudden young Haslewood became attentive and interested, and having satisfied himself which was the line that Glossin patronised, assured his friend it should not be his fault if his father did not countenance any other instead of that. But these various interruptions consumed the morning. Haslewood got on horseback at least 3 hours later than he intended, and cursing fine ladies' pointers, puppies, and turnpike acts of Parliament, saw himself detained beyond the time when he could with propriety intrude upon the family at Woodbourne. He had passed therefore the turn of the road which led to that mansion, only edified by the distant appearance of the blue smoke curling against the pale sky of the winter evening, when he thought he beheld the Dominie taking a footpath for the house through the woods. He called after him, but in vain, for that honest gentleman, never the most susceptible of extraneous impressions, had just that moment parted from Meg Merrilies, and was too deeply wrapped up in pondering upon her vaticinations to make any answer to Haslewood's call. He was therefore obliged to let him proceed without inquiry after the health of the young ladies, or any other fishing question, to which he might by good chance have had an answer returned, wherein Miss Bertram's name might have been mentioned. All cause for haste was now over, and slackening the reins up on his horse's neck, he permitted the animal to ascend at his own leisure the steep sandy track between two high banks, which, rising to a considerable height, commanded at length an extensive view of the neighbouring country. Haslewood was, however, so far from eagerly looking forward to this prospect, though it had the recommendation that great part of the land was his father's, and must necessarily be his own, that his head still turned backward towards the chimneys of Woodbourne, although at every step his horse made the difficulty of employing his eyes in that direction become greater from the reverie in which he was sunk. He was suddenly roused by a voice too harsh to be called female, yet too shrill for a man. "What's kept you on the road, Sae Langmon, ither folk do you walk?" He looked up. The spokeswoman was very tall, had a voluminous handkerchief rolled round her head, grizzled hair flowing in elflocks from beneath it, a long red cloak, and a staff in her band headed with a sort of spearpointit, was in short Meg Merrilies. Haslewood had never seen this remarkable figure before. He drew up his reins in astonishment at her appearance, and made a full stop. "I think," continued she, "they that hae teen interest in the house of Ellengowan suld sleep nane. This night 3 men hae been seeking ye, and you are gone hame to sleep in your bed. I think, if the lad bairn fa's the sister will do weel none." "I don't understand you, good woman," said Haslewood. "If you speak of Miss, I mean of any of the late Ellengowan family. Tell me what I can do for them." "Of the late Ellengowan family," she answered with great vehemence, "of the late Ellengowan family. And when was there ever, or when will there ever be a family of Ellengowan, but bearing the gallant name of the bold Bertram?" "But what do you mean, good woman?" "I am nae good womana, the country kens I am bad enug, and baith they and I may be sorry enug that I am nae better, but I can do what good women canna and dorna do. I can do what would freeze the blood o' them that is bred in bigot, was built walls for neathing, but to bind bairns' heads, and to hap them in the cradle here. Meth guards drawn off at the custom house at Portonferry, and it's brought up to Haslewood House by your father's orders, because he thinks his house is to be attacked this night by the smugglers. There's nobody means to touch his house. He has gude blood and gentle blood. I say little o' him for himself, but there's nobody thinks him worth meddling. Why, send the horsemen back to their post cannily, cautiously and quietly, and they win a hay walk the night. Will thae guns will flash, and the swords will glitter in the braw moon." "Good God, what do you mean?" said Haslewood. "Your words and manner would persuade me you are mad, and yet there is a strange combination in what you say. I am not mad, exclaimed the gypsy. I have been imprisoned for mad, scourged for mad, banished for mad, but mad. I am not here. Ye Charles Haslewood of Haslewood, I bear malice against him that wounded you. No, dame, God forbid, my arm is quite well, and I have always said the shot was discharged by accident. I should be glad to tell the young man so himself. Then do what I bid ye, answered Meg Merrilies, and ye'll do him mair good than ever he did you ill, for if he was left to his ill-wishers, he would be a bloody corpse ere morn, or a banished man. But there's ane abune above ado, as I bid you send back the soldiers to Portenfrey. There's nae mair fear o' Haslewood House than there's o' Crufflefell. And she vanished with her usual celerity of pace. It would seem that the appearance of this female, and the mixture of frenzy and enthusiasm in her manner, seldom failed to produce the strongest impression upon those whom she addressed. Her words, though wild, were too plain and intelligible for actual madness, and yet too vehement and extravagant for sober-minded communication. She seemed acting under the influence of an imagination rather strongly excited than deranged, and it is wonderful how palpably the difference in such cases is impressed upon the mind of the auditor. This may account for the attention with which her strange and mysterious hints were heard and acted upon. It is certain at least that young Haslewood was strongly impressed by her sudden appearance and imperative tone. He rode to Haslewood at a brisk pace. It had been dark fought some time before he reached the house, and on his arrival there, he saw a confirmation of what the Sibyl had hinted. 30 dragoon horses stood under a shed near the offices with their bridles linked together. 3 or 4 soldiers attended as a guard, while others stamped up and down with their long broadswords and heavy boots in front of the house. Haslewood asked a non-commissioned officer from whence they came. From Portenfrey. Had they left any guard there? No, they had been drawn off by order of Sir Robert Haslewood for defence of his house against an attack which was threatened by the smugglers. Charles Haslewood instantly went in quest of his father, and having paid his respects to him upon his return, requested to know upon what account he had thought it necessary to send for a military escort. Sir Robert assured his son in reply that from the information, intelligence and tidings which had been communicated to and laid before him, he had the deepest reason to believe credit and be convinced that a riotous assault would that night be attempted and perpetrated against Haslewood House by a set of smugglers, gypsies and other desperadoes. And what, my dear sir, said his son, should direct the fury of such persons against ours rather than any other house in the country? I should rather think, suppose, and be of opinion, sir, answered Sir Robert, with deference to your wisdom and experience, that on these occasions and times the vengeance of such persons is directed or levelled against the most important and distinguished, in point of rank, talent, birth, and situation, who have checked, interfered with, and discountenanced their unlawful and illegal and criminal actions or deeds. Young Haslewood, who knew his father's foible, answered that the cause of his surprise did not lie where Sir Robert apprehended, but that he only wondered they should think of attacking a house where there were so many servants, and where a signal to the neighbouring tenants could call in such strong assistance, and added that he doubted much whether the reputation of the family would not in some degree suffer from calling soldiers from their duty at the custom-house to protect them, as if they were not sufficiently strong to defend themselves upon any ordinary occasion. He even hinted that, in case their house's enemies should observe that this precaution had been taken unnecessarily, there would be no end of their sarcasms. Sir Robert Haslewood was rather puzzled at this intimation, for like most dull men, he heartily hated and feared ridicule. He gathered himself up, and looked with a sort of pompous embarrassment, as if he wished to be thought to despise the opinion of the public, which in reality he dreaded. I really should have thought, he said, that the injury which had already been aimed at my house in your person, being the next heir and representative of the Haslewood family, failing me, I should have thought, and believed, I say, that this would have justified me sufficiently in the eyes of the most respectable and the greater part of the people for taking such precautions as are calculated to prevent and impede a repetition of outrage. Really, sir, said Charles, I must remind you of what I have often said before, that I am positive the discharge of the piece was accidental. Sir, it was not accidental, said his father angrily, but you will be wiser than your elders. Really, sir, replied Haslewood, in what so intimately concerns myself. Sir, it does not concern you, but in a very secondary degree, that is, it does not concern you as a giddy young fellow who takes pleasure in contradicting his father. But it concerns the country, sir, and the county, sir, and the public, sir, and the kingdom of Scotland, in so far as the interest of the Haslewood family, sir, is committed and interested, and put in peril in by and through you, sir, and the fellow is in safe custody, and Mr. Glossin thinks. Mr. Glossin, sir? Yes, sir, the gentleman who has purchased Ellengowan, you know who. I mean, I suppose. Yes, sir, answered the young man, but I should hardly have expected to hear you quote such authority. Why, this fellow, all the world knows him to be sordid, mean, tricking. And I suspect him to be worse, and you yourself, my dear sir, when did you call such a person a gentleman in your life before? Why, Charles, I did not mean gentleman in the precise sense and meaning, and restricted and proper use, to which no doubt the phrase ought legitimately to be confined. But I meant to use it relatively, as marking something of that state, to which he has elevated and raised himself, as designing in short a decent, and wealthy and estimable sort of a person. Allow me to ask, sir, said Charles, if it was by this man's orders that the guard was drawn from Portenferry. So replied the baronet, I do apprehend that Mr. Glossin would not presume to give orders, or even an opinion, unless asked in a matter in which Haslewood House and the house of Haslewood, meaning, by the one this mansion house of my family, and by the other typically metaphorically and parabolically, the family itself, I say then, where the house of Haslewood or Haslewood House was so immediately concerned. I presume, however, sir, said the son, this Glossin approved of the proposal. So replied his father, I thought it decent and right and proper to consult him as the nearest magistrate, as soon as report of the intended outrage reached my ears, and although he declined out of deference and respect, as became our relative situations, to concur in the order, yet he did entirely approve of my arrangement. At this moment, a horse's feet were heard coming very fast up the avenue. In a few minutes the door opened, and Mr. Macmorland presented himself. I am under great concern to intrude, Sir Robert, but— Give me leave, Mr. Macmorland, said Sir Robert with a gracious flourish of welcome. This is no intrusion, sir, for your situation as sheriff substitute calling upon you to attend to the peace of the county, and you doubtless feeling yourself particularly called upon to protect Haslewood House, you have an acknowledged and admitted and undeniable right, sir, to enter the house of the first gentleman in Scotland, uninvited ways presuming you to be called there, by the duty of your office. It is indeed the duty of my office, said Macmorland, who waited with impatience an opportunity to speak, that makes me an intruder. No intrusion, reiterated the baronet, gracefully waving his hand. But permit me to say, Sir Robert, said the sheriff substitute, I do not come with the purpose of remaining here, but to recall these soldiers to Portenferry, and to assure you that I will answer for the safety of your house. To withdraw the guard from Haslewood House, exclaimed the proprietor in mingled displeasure and surprise. And you will be answerable for it, and pray, who are you, sir, that I should take your security and caution, and pledge official or personal, for the safety of Haslewood House? I think, sir, and believe, sir, and am of opinion, sir, that if any one of these family pictures were deranged or destroyed or injured, it would be difficult for me to make up the loss upon the guarantee which you so obligingly offer me. In that case I shall be sorry for it, Sir Robert, answered the downright Macmorland, but I presume I may escape the pain of feeling my conduct the cause of such irreparable loss, as I can assure you there will be no attempt upon Haslewood House whatever, and I have received information which induces me to suspect that the rumour was put afloat merely in order to occasion the removal of the soldiers from Portenferry, and under this strong belief and conviction I must exert my authority as sheriff and chief magistrate of police to order the whole or greater part of them back again. I regret much that by my accidental absence a good deal of delay has already taken place, and we shall not now reach Portenferry until it is late. As Mr. Macmorland was the superior magistrate, and expressed himself peremptory in the purpose of acting as such, the baronet, though highly offended, could only say, very well, sir, it is very well, nay, sir, take them all with you. I am far from desiring any to be left here, sir. We, sir, can protect ourselves, sir, but you will have the goodness to observe, sir, that you are acting on your own proper risk, sir, and peril, sir, and responsibility, sir, if anything shall happen or befall to Haslewood House, sir, or the inhabitants, sir, or to the furniture and painting, sir. I am acting to the best of my judgment and information, Sir Robert, said Macmorland, and I must pray of you to believe so, and to pardon me accordingly. I beg you to observe it is no time for ceremony, it is already very late. But Sir Robert, without deigning to listen to his apologies, immediately employed himself with much parade in arming, and arraying his domestics. Charles Haslewood longed to accompany the military which were about to depart for Portenferry, and which were now drawn up and mounted by direction, and under the guidance of Mr. Macmorland as the civil magistrate, but it would have given just pain and offence to his father to have left him at a moment when he conceived himself and his mansion house in danger. Young Haswood therefore gazed from a window with suppressed regret and displeasure, until he heard the officer give the word of command from the right to the front, by files march leading file to the right wheel trot the whole party of soldiers, then getting into a sharp and uniform pace were soon lost among the trees, and the noise of the hoofs died speedily away in the distance. Chapter Roman 48 W. Coulter's the forerun of a plough, and why 4 hammers, we gad made the bars bang merrily, until we came to the inner prison, where Willie o' Kinmont he did lie old border ballad. We returned to Portonferry, and to Bertram and his honest-hearted friend, whom we left most innocent inhabitants of a place built for the guilty. The slumbers of the farmer were as sound as it was possible. But Bertram's first heavy sleep passed away long before midnight, nor could he again recover that state of oblivion, added to the uncertain and uncomfortable state of his mind. His body felt feverish, and oppressed. This was chiefly owing to the close and confined air of the small apartment in which they slept after enduring for some time the broiling and suffocating feeling attendant upon such an atmosphere. He rose to endeavour to open the window of the apartment, and thus to procure a change of air. Alas, the first trial reminded him that he was in jail, and that the building being contrived for security, not comfort, the means of procuring fresh air were not left at the disposal of the wretched inhabitants. Disappointed in this attempt, he stood by the unmanageable window for some time. Little Wasp, though oppressed with the fatigue of his journey on the preceding day, crept out of bed after his master, and stood by him rubbing his shaggy coat against his legs, and expressing by a murmuring sound the delight which he felt at being restored to him, thus accompanied and waiting, until the feverish feeling which at present agitated his blood should subside into a desire for warmth and slumber. Bertram remained for some time, looking out upon the sea. The tide was now nearly full and dashed hoarse, and near below the base of the building now, and then a large wave reached even the barrier or bulwark which defended the foundation of the house, and was flung upon it with greater force and noise than those which only broke upon the sand, far in the distance under the indistinct light of a hazy and often overclouded moon. The ocean rolled its multitudinous complication of waves, crossing, bursting, and mingling with each other. A wild and dim spectacle, said Bertram to himself, like those crossing tides of fate, which have tossed me about the world from my infancy upwards. When will this uncertainty cease, and how soon shall I be permitted to look out for a tranquil home, where I may cultivate in quiet, and without dread and perplexity, those arts of peace from which my cares have been hitherto so forcibly diverted? The ear of fancy, it is said, can discover the voice of sea nymphs and tritons amid the bursting murmurs of the ocean. Would that I could do so, and that some siren or Proteus would arise from these billows, to unriddle for me the strange maze of fate in which I am so deeply entangled. Happy friend, he said, looking at the bed, where Dinmont had deposited his bulky person, thy cares are confined to the narrow round of a healthy and thriving occupation. Thou canst lay them aside at pleasure, and enjoy the deep repose of body and mind, which wholesome labour has prepared for thee. At this moment, his rejections were broken by Little Wasp, who, attempting to spring up against the window, began to yelp and bark most furiously. The sound reached Dinmont's ears, but without dissipating the illusion which had transported him from this wretched apartment to the free air of his own green hills. Hoy yarrow manfar yod, he muttered between his teeth, imagining doubtless that he was calling to his sheepdog, and hounding him in shepherd's phrase against some intruders on the grazing. The continued barking of the terrier within was answered by the angry challenge of the mastiff in the courtyard, which had for a long time been silent, excepting only an occasional short and deep note uttered when the moon shone suddenly from among the clouds. Now his clamour was continued and furious, and seemed to he excited by some disturbance distinct from the barking of Wasp, which had first given him the alarm, and which with much trouble his master had contrived to still into an angry note of low growling. At last Bertram, whose attention was now fully awakened, conceived that he saw a boat upon the sea, and heard in good earnest the sound of oars and of human voices mingling with the dash of the billows. Some benighted fishermen, he thought, or perhaps some of the desperate traders from the Isle of Man. They are very hardy, however, to approach so near to the custom-house, where there must be sentinels. It is a large boat like a longboat, and full of people. Perhaps it belongs to the revenue service. Bertram was confirmed in this last opinion by observing that the boat made for a little quay which ran into the sea behind the custom-house, and jumping ashore one after another, the crew, to the number of 20 hands, glided secretly up a small lane which divided the custom-house from the bridewell, and disappeared from his sight, leaving only 2 persons to take care of the boat. The dash of these men's oars at first and latterly, the suppressed sounds of their voices, had excited the wrath of the wakeful sentinel in the courtyard, who now exalted his deep voice into such a horrid and continuous din, that it awakened his brute master as savage a bandug as himself. His cry from a window of "How now, Terem, what's the matter, Sir Don Dienyi?" down produced no abatement of Terem's vociferation, which in part prevented his master from bearing the sounds of alarm, which his ferocious vigilance was in the act of challenging. But the mate of the Tulagid Cerberus was gifted with sharper ears than her husband. She also was now at the window. "Bt ye gie down, and let loose the dog," she said. "They're a sporting the door of the custom house, and the old sap at Hazelwood House has ordered off the guard, but ye hae nae mair heart than a cat." And down the Amazon sallied to perform the task herself, while her helpmate, more jealous of insurrection within doors than of storm from without, went from cell to cell, to see that the inhabitants of each were carefully secured. These latter sounds, with which we have made the reader acquainted, had their origin in front of the house, and were consequently imperfectly heard by Bertram, whose apartment, as we have already noticed, looked from the back part of the building upon the sea. He heard, however, a stir and tumult in the house, which did not seem to accord with the stern seclusion of a prison at the hour of midnight, and, connecting them with the arrival of an armed boat at that dead hour, could not but suppose that something extraordinary was about to take place. In this belief, he shook Dinmont by the shoulder. "Aio, ailey woman, it's no time to get up yet," growled the sleeping man of the mountains, more roughly shaken. However, he gathered himself up, shook his ears, and asked in the name of Providence, "What's the matter?" "That I can't tell you," replied Bertram, "but either the place is on fire or some extraordinary thing is about to happen. Are you not sensible of a smell of fire? Do you not hear what a noise there is of clashing doors within the house, and of hoarse voices, murmurs, and distant shouts on the outside? Upon my word, I believe something very extraordinary has taken place. Get up, for the love of heaven, and let us be on our guard." Dinmont rose at the idea of danger as intrepid and undismayed as any of his ancestors. When the beacon light was kindled, "Ard Captain, this is a queer place. They winna let ye out in the day, and they winna let ye sleep in the night deal, but it wad break my heart in a fortnight. But Lord's sake, what a racket they're making now. Ard, I wish we had some light. Wasp, wisht hinny wisht, my bonny man, and let's hear what they're doing. Deals in ye, will ye wisht?" They sought in vain among the embers the means of lighting their candle, and the noise without still continued. Dinmont in his turn had recourse to the window. "Lord's sake, Captain, come here. Ard, they hae broken the custom house." Bertram hastened to the window, and plainly saw a miscellaneous crowd of smugglers and blackguards of different descriptions, some carrying lighted torches, others bearing packages and barrels down the lane to the boat that was lying at the quay, to which 2 or 3 other fisher boats were now brought round. They were loading each of these in their turn, and 1 or 2 had already put off to seaward. "This speaks for itself," said Bertram, "but I fear something worse has happened. Do you perceive a strong smell of smoke, or is it my fancy?" "Fancy," answered Dinmont. "There's a reek like a killogy, a limekiln. Ard, if they burn the custom house it will catch here, and well lunt burn like a tarbarrel o' the gither. It wad be fearsome to be burnt alive, for neathing like as if ane had been a warlock witch. Mac Guffog here, roaring at the top of his voice, and ye wad ever hae a hale bane in your skin. Let's out, man, let's out." The fire began now to rise high, and thick clouds of smoke rolled past the window at which Bertram and Dinmont were stationed. Sometimes, as the wind pleased, the dim shroud of vapour hid everything from their sight. Sometimes, a red glare illuminated both land and sea, and shone full on the stern and fierce figures who, wild with ferocious activity, were engaged in loading the boats. The fire was at length triumphant, and spouted in jets of flame out at each window of the burning building, while huge flakes of flaming materials came driving on the wind against the adjoining prison, and rolling a dark canopy of smoke over all the neighbourhood. The shouts of a furious mob resounded far and wide, for the smugglers in their triumph were joined by all the rabble of the little town and neighbourhood, now aroused, and in complete agitation, notwithstanding the lateness of the hour, some from interest in the free trade, and most from the general love of mischief and tumult natural to a vulgar populace. Bertram began to be seriously anxious for their fate. There was no stir in the house. It seemed as if the jailer had deserted his charge, and left the prison with its wretched inhabitants to the mercy of the conflagration, which was spreading towards them. In the meantime, a new and fierce attack was heard upon the outer gate of the correction house, which, battered with sledgehammers and crows, was soon forced. The keeper, as great a coward as a bully, with his more ferocious wife, had fled. Their servants readily surrendered the keys. The liberated prisoners, celebrating their deliverance with the wildest yells of joy mingled among the mob which had given them freedom. In the midst of the confusion that ensued, 3 or 4 of the principal smugglers hurried to the apartment of Bertram with lighted torches, and armed with cutlasses and pistols. "Daredevil," said the leader, "here's our mark." And 2 of them seized on Bertram, but one whispered in his ear, "Make no resistance till you are in the street." The same individual found an instant to say to Dinmont, "Follow our friend and help, when you see the time come." In the hurry of the moment, Dinmont obeyed and followed close. The 2 smugglers dragged Bertram along the passage downstairs through the courtyard, now illuminated by the glare of fire, and into the narrow street, to which the gate opened, where in the confusion the gang were necessarily, in some degree, separated from each other. A rapid noise, as of a body of horse advancing, seemed to add to the disturbance. "Hagel and Wetter, what is that?" said the leader. "Keep together, kinder look to the prisoner." But in spite of his charge, the 2 who held Bertram were the last of the party. The sounds and signs of violence were heard in front. The press became curiously agitated. While some endeavoured to defend themselves, others to escape. Shots were fired, and the glittering broadswords of the dragoons began to appear flashing above the beads of the rioters. "Now," said the warning whisper of the man who held Bertram's left arm, the same who had spoken before, "Shake off that fellow and follow me." Bertram, exerting his strength suddenly and effectually, easily burst from the grasp of the man who held his collar on the right side. The fellow attempted to draw a pistol, but was prostrated by a blow of Dinmont's fist, which an ox could hardly have received without the same humiliation. "Follow me quick," said the friendly partisan, and dived through a very narrow and dirty lane which led from the main street. No pursuit took place. The attention of the smugglers had been otherwise, and very disagreeably engaged by the sudden appearance of Mac Morlan, and the party of horse. The loud manly voice of the provincial magistrate was heard proclaiming the riot act, and charging all those unlawfully assembled to disperse at their own proper peril. This interruption would indeed have happened in time sufficient to have prevented the attempt, had not the magistrate received upon the road some false information, which led him to think that the smugglers were to land at the Bay of Ellengowan. Nearly 2 hours were lost in consequence of this false intelligence, which it may be no lack of charity to suppose that Glossin, so deeply interested in the issue of that night's daring attempt, had contrived to throw in Mac Morlan's way, availing himself of the knowledge that the soldiers had left Haslewood House, which would soon reach an ear so anxious. In the meantime, Bertram followed his guide, and was in his turn followed by Dinmont. The shouts of the mob, the trampling of the horses, the dropping pistol shots, sunk more and more faintly upon their ears, when at the end of the dark lane they found a post-chaise with 4 horses. "Are you here, in God's name?" said the guide to the postilion who drove the leaders. "I troth am I," answered Jack Jobos, "and I wish I were any gate else." "Open the carriage, then, you gentlemen, get into it in a short time. You'll be in a place of safety, and, to Bertram, remember your promise to the gypsy wife." Bertram, resolving to be passive in the hands of a person who had just rendered him such a distinguished piece of service, got into the chaise. As directed, Dinmont followed. Wasp, who had kept close by them, sprung in at the same time, and the carriage drove off very fast. "Have a care o' me," said Dinmont. "But this is the queerest thing yet odd. I trust they'll no coup upset yous, and then what's to come o' Dumpelai would rather be on his back than in the Duke's coach, God bless him." Bertram observed that they could not go at that rapid rate to any great distance without changing horses, and that they might insist upon remaining till daylight at the first inn they stopped at, or at least upon being made acquainted with the purpose and termination of their journey, and Mr. Dinmont might there give directions about his faithful horse, which would probably be safe at the stables where he had left him. "Awil in sae be it, for dandy odd. If we were ants out o' this trindling kist rolling chest o' a thing, I am thinking they wad find it hard walk to gar us gang ony gate, but where we liked ourselves." While he thus spoke, the carriage, making a sudden turn, showed them through the left window the village at some distance, still widely beaconed by the fire which, having reached a storehouse wherein spirits were deposited, now rose high into the air, a wavering column of brilliant light. They had not long time to admire this spectacle, for another turn of the road carried them into a close lane between plantations, through which the chaise proceeded in nearly total darkness, but with unabated speed. Chapter Roman 49. The night drave on wi sangs and clatter, and the ale was growing better. Tam o' Shanter. We must now return to Woodbourne, which, it may be remembered, we left just after the colonel had given some directions to his confidential servant, when he returned his absence of mind, and an unusual expression of thought and anxiety upon his features struck the ladies whom he joined in the drawing-room Mannering, was not, however, to be questioned even by those whom he most loved upon the cause of the mental agitation, which these signs expressed. The hour of tea arrived, and the party were partaking of that refreshment in silence when a carriage drove up to the door, and the bell announced the arrival of a visitor. Surely, said Mannering, it is too soon by some hours. There was a short pause when Barnes, opening the door of the saloon, announced Mr. Playdell. In marched the lawyer, whose well-brushed black coat and well-powdered wig, together with his point ruffles, brown silk stockings, highly varnished shoes and gold buckles, exhibited the pains which the old gentleman had taken to prepare his person for the ladies' society. He was welcomed by Mannering with a hearty shake, by the hand, the very man I wished to see at this moment. Yes, said the counsellor, I told you I would take the first opportunity, so I have ventured to leave the court for a week in session time, no common sacrifice, but I had a notion I could be useful, and I was to attend a proof here about the same time. But will you not introduce me to the young ladies? There is one I should have known at once from her family likeness, Miss Lucy Bertram. My love, I am most happy to see you on. He folded her in his arms, and gave her a hearty kiss on each side of the face, to which Lucy submitted in blushing resignation. On narrate pardans unsi beau kemin, continued the gay old gentleman, and as the colonel presented him to Julia, took the same liberty with that fair lady's cheek. Julia laughed, coloured, and disengaged herself. I beg 1,000 pardons, said the lawyer with a bow which was not at all professionally awkward. Age and old fashions give privileges, and I can hardly say whether I am most sorry just now at being too well entitled to claim them at all, or happy in having such an opportunity to exercise them so agreeably. Upon my word, sir, said Miss Mannering, laughing, if you make such flattering apologies, we shall begin to doubt whether we can admit you to shelter yourself under your alleged qualifications. I can assure you, Julia, said the colonel, you are perfectly right. My friend the counsellor is a dangerous person. The last time I had the pleasure of seeing him, he was closeted with a fair lady, who had granted him a tete-a-tete at 8 in the morning. Ay, but colonel, said the counsellor, you should add I was more indebted to my chocolate than my charms for so distinguished a favour from a person of such propriety of demeanour as Mrs. Rebecca. And that should remind me, Mr. Playdell, said Julia, to offer you tea. That is supposing you have dined. Anything, Miss Mannering, from your hands, answered the gallant jurisconsult. Yes, I have dined, that is to say as people dine at a Scotch inn. And that is indifferently enough, said the colonel with his hand upon the bell-handle. Give me leave to order something. Why, to say truth, replied Mr. Playdell, I had rather not. I have been inquiring into that matter, for you must know, I stopped an instant below to pull off my buthos, a world too wide for my shrunk, shanks glancing down with some complacency upon limbs, which looked very well for his time of life, and I had some conversation with your Barnes, and a very intelligent person whom I presume to be the housekeeper, and it was settled among us tota re prospecta. I beg Miss Mannering's pardon for my Latin, that the old lady should add to your light family supper the more substantial refreshment of a brace of wild ducks. I told her, always under deep submission, my poor thoughts about the sauce, which concurred exactly with her own. And if you please, I would rather wait till they are ready before eating anything solid. And we will anticipate our usual hour of supper, said the colonel. With all my heart, said Playdell, providing I do not lose the lady's company. A moment the sooner I am of counsel with my old friend, Burnet. C. Note Roman 8 Lord Monbado. I love the keener the supper of the ancients, the pleasant meal, and social glass, that wash out of one's mind the cobwebs that business or gloom have been spinning in our brains all day. Mr. Playdell's look and manner, and the quietness with which he made himself at home on the subject of his little Epicurean comforts, amused the ladies, but particularly Miss Mannering, who immediately gave the counsellor a great deal of flattering attention, and more pretty things were said on both sides during the service of the teetable than we have leisure to repeat. As soon as this was over, Mannering led the counsellor by the arm into a small study which opened from the saloon, and where, according to the custom of the family, there were always lights and a good fire in the evening. I see, said Mr. Playdell, you have got something to tell me about the Ellengowan business. Is it terrestrial or celestial? What says my military albumazar? Have you calculated the course of futurity? Have you consulted your ephemerides, your Olmachode and your Olmuten? No, truly, counsellor, replied Mannering, you are the only Ptolemy I intend to resort to upon the present occasion. Second Prospero, I have broken my staff, and drowned my book far beyond plummet depth. But I have great news notwithstanding. Meg Merrilies, our Egyptian sibyl, has appeared to the Dominie this very day, and as I conjecture has frightened the honest man not a little. Indeed. And she has done me the honour to open a correspondence with me, supposing me to be as deep in astrological mysteries as when we first met. Here is her scroll delivered to me by the Dominie. Pleydell put on his spectacles, a vile greasy scroll indeed, and the letters are uncial or semi-uncial, as somebody calls your large text hand, and in size and perpendicularity resemble the ribs of a roasted pig. I can hardly make it out. I will try, answered the lawyer. You are a good seeker, but a bad finder. You set yourself to prop a falling house, but at a jay guess it would rise again. Lend your hand to the walk, that's near as you lent your ear to the weird destiny, that was far. Have a carriage this night, by 10 o'clock at the end of the crooked dykes at Portenferry, and let it bring the folk to Woodbourne that shall ask them if they be there. In God's name stay here. Follows some poetry dark, shall be light and wrong done to right, when Bertram's right, and Bertram's might shall meet on Ellengowan's height. A most mystic epistle truly, and closes in a vein of poetry, worthy of the Cumean Sibyland. What have you done? Why, said Mannering rather reluctantly, I was loth to risk any opportunity of throwing light on this business. The woman is perhaps crazed, and these effusions may arise only from visions of her imagination, but you were of opinion that she knew more of that strange story than she ever told. And so, said Pleydell, you sent a carriage to the place named. You will laugh at me if I own I did, replied the colonel. Who? I, replied the advocate. No, truly, I think it was the wisest thing you could do. Yes, answered Mannering, well pleased to have escaped the ridicule he apprehended. You know the worst is paying the chaise hire. I sent a post-chaise, and 4 from Kippletringan, with instructions corresponding to the letter. The horses will have a long and cold station on the outposts tonight, if our intelligence be false. But I think it will prove otherwise, said the lawyer. This woman has played a part, till she believes it, or if she be a thorough-paced impostor, without a single grain of self-delusion to qualify her knavery, still she may think herself bound to act in character. I know that I could get nothing out of her by the common modes of interrogation, and the wisest thing we can do is to give her an opportunity of making the discovery her own way. And now, have you more to say, or shall we go to the ladies? Why, my mind is uncommonly agitated, answered the colonel, and but I really have no more to say, only I shall count the minutes till the carriage returns, but you cannot be expected to be so anxious. Why, now, is all in all, said the more experienced lawyer. I am much interested, certainly, but I think I shall be able to survive the interval if the ladies will afford us some music. And with the assistance of the Wilducks, by and by, suggested Mannering. True, colonel, a lawyer's anxiety about the fate of the most interesting cause has seldom spoiled either his sleep or digestion. Note Roman 9, lawyers' sleepless nights. And yet I shall be very eager to hear the rattle of these wheels on their return notwithstanding. So saying, he rose, and led the way into the next room, where Miss Mannering, at his request, took her seat at the harpsichord. Lucy Bertram, who sung her native melodies very sweetly, was accompanied by her friend upon the instrument, and Julia afterwards performed some of Scarlatti's sonatas with great brilliancy, the old lawyer scraping a little upon the violoncello, and being a member of the gentlemen's concert in Edinburgh, was so greatly delighted with this mode of spending the evening that I doubt if he once thought of the Wilducks, until Barnes informed the company that supper was ready. Tell Mrs. Allen to have something in readiness, said the colonel. I expect that is, I hope perhaps some company may be here tonight, and let the men sit up, and do not lock the upper gate on the lawn until I desire you. Lord, sir, said Julia, whom can you possibly expect tonight? Why, some persons strangers to me talked of calling in the evening on business, answered her father, not without embarrassment, for he would have little brooked a disappointment, which might have thrown ridicule on his judgment. It is quite uncertain. Well, we shall not pardon them for disturbing our party, said Julia, unless they bring as much good humour, and as susceptible hearts as my friend and admirer, for so he has dubbed himself, Mr. Pleydell. Ah, Miss Julia, said Pleydell, offering his arm with an air of gallantry to conduct her into the eating-room, the time has been when I returned from Utrecht in the year I. Pray don't talk of it, answered the young lady, like you much better as you are Utrecht. In heaven's name, I dare say you have spent all the intervening years in getting rid so completely of the effects of your Dutch education. Oh, forgive me, Miss Mannering, said the lawyer, the Dutch are a much more accomplished people in point or gallantry than their volatile neighbours are willing to admit. They are constant as clockwork in their attentions. I should tire of that, said Julia. Imperturbable in their good temper, continued Pleydell. Worse and worse, said the young lady. And then said the old Bogarcan, although for 6 times 365 days your swain has placed the capuchin round your neck and the stove under your feet, and driven your little sledge upon the ice in winter, and your cabriole through the dust in summer, you may dismiss him at once without reason or apology upon the 2190th day, which according to my hasty calculation, and without reckoning leap years, will complete the cycle of the supposed adoration, and that without your amiable feelings having the slightest occasion to be alarmed for the consequences to those of Mynheer. Well, replied Julia, that last is truly a Dutch recommendation, Mr. Pleydell. Crystalline hearts would lose all their merit in the world, if it were not for their fragility. Why, upon that point of the argument, Miss Mannering, it is as difficult to find a heart that will break as a glass that will not, and for that reason I would press the value of mine own were it not that I see Mr. Sampson's eyes have been closed, and his hands clasped for some time attending the end of our conference. To begin the grey sand, to say the truth, the appearance of the wild ducks is very appetizing. So saying, the worthy counsellor sat himself to table, and laid aside his gallantry for a while to do honour to the good things placed before him. Nothing further is recorded of him for some time, excepting an observation that the ducks were roasted to a single turn, and that Mrs. Allen's sauce of claret, lemon, and cayenne was beyond praise. I see, said Miss Mannering, I have a formidable rival in Mr. Pleydell's favour, even on the very first night of his avowed admiration. Pardon me, my fair lady, answered the counsellor, your avowed rigour alone has induced me to commit the solecism of eating a good supper in your presence. How shall I support your frowns, without reinforcing my strength upon the same principle? And no other I will ask permission to drink wine with you. This is the fashion of Utrecht, also I suppose, Mr. Pleydell. Forgive me, madam, answered the counsellor, the French themselves, the patterns of all that is gallant, term their tavern-keepers restaurateurs, alluding doubtless to the relief they afford the disconsolate lover, when bowed down to the earth by his mistress' severity. My own case requires so much relief that I must trouble you for that other wing, Mr. Sampson, without prejudice to my afterwards, applying to Miss Bertram, for a tart please to tear the wing, sir, instead of cutting it off. Mr. Barnes will assist you, Mr. Sampson. Thank you, sir, and Mr. Barnes, a glass of ale, if you please. While the old gentleman, pleased with Miss Mannering's liveliness and attention, rattled away for her amusement, and his own the impatience of Colonel Mannering began to exceed all bounds, he declined sitting down at table under pretence that he never ate supper, and traversed the parlour in which they were with hasty and impatient steps, now throwing tip the window to gaze upon the dark lawn, now listening for the remote sound of the carriage advancing up the avenue. At length, in a feeling of uncontrollable impatience, he left the room, took his hat and cloak, and pursued his walk up the avenue, as if his so doing would hasten the approach of those whom he desired to see. I really wish, said Miss Bertram, Colonel Mannering would not venture out after nightfall. You must have heard, Mr. Pleydell, what a cruel fright we had. Oh, with the smugglers, replied the advocate, are old friends of mine. I was the means of bringing some of them to justice a long time since when sheriff of this county. And then the alarm we had immediately afterwards, added Miss Bertram, from the vengeance of one of these wretches. When young Haslewood was hurt, I heard of that too. Imagine, my dear Mr. Pleydell, continued Lucy, how much Miss Mannering and I were alarmed when a ruffian equally dreadful for his great strength and the sternness of his features rushed out upon us. You must know, Mr. Pleydell, said Julia, unable to suppress her resentment at this undesigned aspersion of her admirer, that young Haslewood is so handsome in the eyes of the young ladies of this country that they think every person shocking who comes near him. Oh, thought Pleydell, who was by profession an observer of tones and gestures, there's something wrong here between my young friends. Well, Miss Mannering, I have not seen young Haslewood since he was a boy, so the ladies may be perfectly right, but I can assure you, in spite of your scorn, that if you want to see handsome men, you must go to Holland. The prettiest fellow I ever saw was a Dutchman, in spite of his being called Van Bast, or Van Buster, or some such barbarous name. He will not be quite so handsome now, to be sure. It was now Julia's turn to look a little out of countenance at the chance hit of her learned admirer, but that instant the Colonel entered the room. I can hear nothing of them, yet he said still, however, we will not separate. Where is Dominie Sampson? Here, honoured sir. What is that book you hold in your hand, Mr. Sampson? It's even the learned Delira, sir. I would crave his honour, Mr. Pleydell's judgment, always with his best leisure, to expound a disputed passage. I am not in the vein, Mr. Sampson, answered Pleydell. Here's metal more attractive. I do not despair to engage these two young ladies in a glee or a catch, wherein I myself will adventure myself, for the bass part-hang de lyra man keep him for a fitter season. The disappointed Dominie shut his ponderous tome, much marvelling in his mind how a person possessed of the lawyer's erudition could give his mind to these frivolous toys. But the counsellor, indifferent to the high character for learning which he was trifling away, filled himself a large glass of Burgundy, and after preluding a little with a voice somewhat the worse for wear, gave the ladies a courageous invitation to join in We Be Three Poor Mariners, and accomplished his own part therein with great eclat. "Are you not withering your roses with sitting up so late, my young ladies?" said the colonel. "Not a bit, sir," answered Julia. "Your friend Mr. Playdell threatens to become a pupil of Mr. Sampson's tomorrow, so we must make the most of our conquest tonight." This led to another musical trial of skill, and that to lively conversation at length, when the solitary sound of 1 o'clock had long since resounded on the ebon ear of night, and the next signal of the advance of time was close approaching. Mannering, whose impatience had long subsided into disappointment and despair, looked at his watch, and said, "We must now give them Upwin at that instant, but what then befell will require a separate chapter." Chapter Roman 50, Justice. This does indeed confirm each circumstance. The gypsy told, "No orphan nor without a friend art thou. I am thy father, here's thy mother, there thy uncle, this thy first cousin, and these are all thy near relations." The critic. As Mannering replaced his watch, he heard a distant and hollow sound. "It is a carriage for certain. It is but the sound of the wind among the leafless trees. Do come to the window, Mr. Playdell." The counsellor, who with his large silk handkerchief in his hand was expatiating away to Julia upon some subject which he thought was interesting, obeyed however the summons, first wrapping the handkerchief round his neck by way of precaution against the cold air. The sound of wheels became now very perceptible, and Playdell, as if he had reserved all his curiosity till that moment, ran out to the hall. The colonel rung for Barnes to desire that the persons who came in the carriage might be shown into a separate room, being altogether uncertain whom it might contain. It stopped however at the door before his purpose, could he fully explained a moment after Mr. Playdell called out, "Here's our Liddesdale friend, I protest," with a strapping young fellow of the same calibre. His voice arrested Dinmont, who recognised him with equal surprise and pleasure. "Odd, if it's your honour Wellaby as right and tight as thack and rape can make us when a farmer's crop is got safety into the barnyard. It is said to be made fast with thack and rape, Anglic straw and rope." But while the farmer stopped to make his bow, Bertram, dizzied with the sudden glare of light and bewildered with the circumstances of his situation, almost unconsciously entered the open door of the parlour, and confronted the colonel, who was just advancing towards it. The strong light of the apartment left no doubt of his identity, and he himself was as much confounded with the appearance of those to whom he so unexpectedly presented himself as they were by the sight of so utterly unlooked for an object. It must be remembered that each individual present had their own peculiar reasons for looking with terror upon what seemed at first sight a spectral apparition. Mannering saw before him the man whom he supposed he had killed in India. Julia beheld her lover in a most peculiar and hazardous situation, and Lucy Bertram at once knew the person who had fired upon young Haslewood. Bertram, who interpreted the fixed and motionless astonishment of the colonel into displeasure at his intrusion, hastened to say that it was involuntary, since he had been hurried hither without even knowing whither he was to be transported. "Mr. Brown, I believe," said Colonel Mannering. "Yes, sir," replied the young man modestly, but with firmness, "the same you knew in India, and who ventures to hope that what you did then know of him is not such as should prevent his requesting you would favour him with your attestation to his character as a gentleman and man of honour. Mr. Brown, I have been seldom never so much surprised, certainly, sir, in whatever passed between us. You have a right to command my favourable testimony." At this critical moment entered the counsellor, and Dinmont. The former beheld to his astonishment the colonel, but just recovering from his first surprise, Lucy Bertram, ready to faint with terror, and Miss Mannering, in an agony of doubt and apprehension, which she in vain endeavoured to disguise or suppress. "What is the meaning of all this?" said he. "Has this young fellow brought the Gorgon's head in his hand? Let me look at him, by heaven," he muttered to himself. "The very image of old Ellengowan, yes, the same manly form and handsome features, but with a world of more intelligence in the face, yes, which has kept her word." Then instantly passing to Lucy, "Look at that man. Miss Bertram, my dear, have you never seen anyone like him?" Lucy had only ventured one glance at this object of terror, by which, however, from his remarkable height and appearance, she at once recognized the supposed assassin of young Haslewood, a conviction which excluded, of course, the more favourable association of ideas which might have occurred on a closer view. Don't ask me about him, sir, said she, turning away her eyes. Send him away for heaven's sake. We shall all be murdered. Murdered? Where's the poker? Said the advocate in some alarm. But nonsense, we are 3 men besides the servants. And there is honest Liddesdale worth half a dozen to boot. We have the Major Vis upon our side, however. Here, my friend Dandy, Davuhat do they call Yowkeep, between that fellow and us for the protection of the ladies. Lord Mr. Playdell, said the astonished farmer, that's Captain Brown. Die no ken the captain. Nay, if he's a friend of yours, we may be safe enough, answered Playdell, but keep near him. All this passed with such rapidity that it was over before the Dominie had recovered himself from a fit of absence, shut the book which he had been studying in a corner, and advancing to obtain a sight of the strangers, exclaimed at once upon beholding Bertram, "If the grave can give up the dead, that is my dear and honoured master." "Were right after all, by heaven, I was sure I was right," said the lawyer. "He is the very image of his father come Colonel. What do you think of that? You do not bid your guest welcome, I think, I believe, I trust. Were right, never saw such a likeness. But patience, Dominie, say not a word. Sit down, young gentleman." "I beg pardon, sir, if I am, as I understand, in Colonel Mannering's house. I should wish first to know if my accidental appearance here gives offence, or if I am welcome." Mannering instantly made an effort. "Welcome, most certainly, especially if you can point out how I can serve you. I believe I may have some wrongs to repair towards you. I have often suspected so, but your sudden and unexpected appearance, connected with painful recollections, prevented my saying at first, as I now say, that whatever has procured me the honour of this visit, it is an acceptable one." Bertram bowed with an air of distant, yet civil acknowledgment to the grave courtesy of Mannering. "Julia, my love, you had better retire. Mr. Brown, you will excuse my daughter. There are circumstances which I perceive rush upon her recollection." Miss Mannering rose and retired accordingly, yet as he passed Bertram could not suppress the words "infatuated" a second time, but so pronounced as to be heard by him alone. Miss Bertram accompanied her friend, much surprised, but without venturing second glance at the object of her terror. Some mistake she saw there was, and was unwilling to increase it by denouncing the stranger as an assassin. He was known, she saw, to the Colonel, and received as a gentleman. Certainly, he either was not the person she suspected, or Hazelwood was right in supposing the shot accidental. The remaining part of the company would have formed no bad group for a skilful painter. Each was too much embarrassed with his own sensations to observe those of the others. Bertram most unexpectedly found himself in the house of one whom he was alternately disposed to dislike as his personal enemy, and to respect as the father of Julia Mannering. Was struggling between his high sense of courtesy and hospitality, his joy at finding himself relieved from the guilt of having shed life in a private quarrel, and the former feelings of dislike and prejudice which revived in his haughty mind at the sight of the object against whom he had entertained them. Sampson, supporting his shaking limbs by leaning on the back of a chair, fixed his eyes upon Bertram with a staring expression of nervous anxiety, which convulsed his whole visage. Dinmont, enveloped in his loose shaggy greatcoat, and resembling a huge bear erect upon his hinder legs, stared on the whole scene with great round eyes that witnessed his amazement. The counsellor alone was in his element, shrewd, prompt, and active. He already calculated the prospect of brilliant success in a strange, eventful, and mysterious lawsuit, and no young monarch flushed with hopes, and at the head of a gallant army, could experience more glee. When taking the field on his first campaign, he bustled about with great energy, and took the arrangement of the whole explanation upon himself. "Come, come, gentlemen, sit down. This is all in my province. You must let me arrange it for you. Sit down, my dear Colonel, and let me manage. Sit down, Mr. Brown. Out quacunc, alio nomen vocaris Dominie. Take your seat. Draw in your chair, honest Liddesdale." "I dinna ken, Mr. Playdell," said Dinmont, looking at his dreadnought coat, then at the handsome furniture of the room. "I had maybe better gang some gate else somewhere else, and leave ye till your cracks him know just that we'll put on." The Colonel, who by this time recognised Dandy, immediately went up and bid him heartily welcome, assuring him that from what he had seen of him in Edinburgh, he was sure his rough coat and thick-soled boots would honour a royal drawing-groom. "None na, Colonel, were just plain up the country folk, but nae doubt I would fain hear o' ony pleasure that was gone to happen the captain, and I am sure will gie right if Mr. Playdell will take his bit job in hand." "You're aye right," Dandy spoke like a Hieland oracle. It may not be unnecessary to tell southern readers that the mountainous country in the southwestern borders of Scotland is called Hieland, though totally different from the much more mountainous and more extensive districts of the north, usually accented Hieland sand. Now, be silent well, you are all seated at last, take a glass of wine, till I begin my catechism methodically. And now turning to Bertram, my dear boy, do you know who or what you are? In spite of his perplexity, the catechumen could not help laughing at this commencement, and answered, Indeed, sir, I formerly thought I did, but I own late circumstances have made me somewhat uncertain. Then tell us what you formerly thought yourself. Why, I was in the habit of thinking and calling myself Van Beest Brown, who served as a cadet or volunteer under Colonel Mannering, when he commanded their regiment, in which capacity I was not unknown to him. There said the Colonel, I can assure Mr. Brown of his identity, and add what his modesty may have forgotten, that he was distinguished as a young man of talent and spirit. So much the better, my dear sir, said Mr. Playdell, but that is to general character. Mr. Brown must tell us where he was born. In Scotland, I believe, but the place uncertain. Where educated? In Holland, certainly. Do you remember nothing of your early life before you left Scotland? Very imperfectly, yet I have a strong idea, perhaps more deeply impressed upon me by subsequent hard usage, that I was during my childhood the object of much solicitude and affection. I have an indistinct remembrance of a good-looking man, whom I used to call Papa, and of a lady who was infirm in health, and who I think must have been my mother. But it is an imperfect and confused recollection. I remember too a tall, thin, kind-tempered man in black, who used to teach me my letters, and walk out with me, I think the very last time. Here the Dominie could contain no longer, while every succeeding word served to prove that the child of his benefactor stood before him. He had struggled with the utmost difficulty to suppress his emotions, but when the juvenile recollections of Bertram turned towards his tutor, and his precepts, he was compelled to give way to his feelings. He rose hastily from his chair, and with clasped bands, trembling limbs, and streaming eyes, called out aloud, Harry Bertram, look at me, was I not the man? Yes, said Bertram, starting from his seat, as if a sudden light had burst in upon his mind. Yes, that was my name, and that is the voice and the figure of my kind old master. The Dominie threw himself into his arms, pressed him 1,000 times to his bosom, in convulsions of transport, which shook his whole frame, sobbed hysterically, and at length, in the emphatic language of Scripture, lifted up his voice, and wept aloud. Colonel Mannering had recourse to his handkerchief. Playdell made wry faces, and wiped the glasses of his spectacles, and honest Dinmont, after 2 loud blubbering explosions, exclaimed, Deals in the man he's garred me do, that I heena done since my old mither died. Come, come, said the counsellor, at last silence in the court, we have a clever party to contend with, we must lose no time in gathering our information for anything. I know there may be something to be done before daybreak. I will order a horse to be saddled, if you please, said the Colonel. No time enough, but come, Dominie, I have allowed you a competent space to express your feelings. I must circumduce the term, you must let me proceed in my examination. The Dominie was habitually obedient to anyone who chose to impose commands upon him. He sunk back into his chair, spread his checked handkerchief over his face, to serve, as I suppose, for the Grecian painter's veil, and from the action of his folded hands, appeared for a time engaged in the act of mental thanksgiving. He then raised his eyes over the screen, as if to be assured that the pleasing apparition had not melted into earthen again, sunk them, to resume his internal act of devotion, until he felt himself compelled to give attention to the counsellor from the interest which his questions excited. And now, said Mr. Playdell, after several minute inquiries concerning his recollection of early events, and now, Mr. Bertram, for I think we ought in future to call you by your own proper name, will you have the goodness to let us know every particular which you can recollect concerning the mode of your leaving Scotland? Indeed, sir, to say the truth, though the terrible outlines of that day are strongly impressed upon my memory, yet somehow the very terror which fixed them there has in a great measure confounded and confused the details. I recollect, however, that I was walking somewhere or other in a wood, I think. Oh yes, it was in Warrock Wood, my dear, said the Dominie. Hush, Mr. Sampson, said the lawyer. Yes, it was in a wood, continued Bertram, as long past and confused ideas arranged themselves in his reviving recollection, and someone was with Methi's worthy and affectionate gentleman, I think. Oh, I, Harry, Lord bless thee, it was even I myself. Be silent, Dominie, and don't interrupt the evidence, said Playdell. And so, sir, to Bertram. And so, sir, continued Bertram, like one of the changes of a dream, I thought I was on horseback before my guide. No, exclaimed Sampson, never did I put my own limbs, not to say thine, into such peril. On my word, this is intolerable. Look ye, Dominie, if you speak another word. Till I give you leave, I will read 3 sentences out of the Black Act's whisk, my cane round my head 3 times, undo all the magic of this night's work, and conjure Harry Bertram back again into Van Beast Brown. Honoured and worthy, so groaned out the Dominie, I humbly crave pardon. It was verbum volens. Well, nolens volens, you must hold your tongue, said Playdell. Pray be silent, Mr. Sampson, said the Colonel. It is of great consequence to your recovered friend that you permit Mr. Playdell to proceed in his inquiries. I am mute, said the rebuked Dominie. On a sudden, continued Bertram, 2 or 3 men sprung out upon us, and we were pulled from horseback. I have little recollection of anything else, but that I tried to escape in the midst of a desperate scuffle, and fell into the arms of a very tall woman who started from the bushes, and protected me for some time. With rest is all confusion and dread, a dim recollection of a sea beach and a cave, and of some strong potion, which lulled me to sleep for a length of time. In short, it is all a blank in my memory, until I recollect myself first an illused and half-starved cabin boy aboard a sloop, and then a schoolboy in Holland under the protection of an old merchant, who had taken some fancy for me. And what account, said Mr. Playdell, did your guardian give of your parentage? A very brief one, answered Bertram, and a charge to inquire no further. I was given to understand that my father was concerned in the smuggling trade, carried on the eastern coast of Scotland, and was killed in a skirmish with the revenue officers, that his correspondents in Holland had a vessel on the coast at the time, part of the crew of which were engaged in the affair, and that they brought me off after it was over from a motive of compassion, as I was left destitute by my father's death. As I grew older, there was much of this story seemed inconsistent with my own recollections, but what could I do? I had no means of ascertaining my doubts, nor a single friend with whom I could communicate or canvass them. The rest of my story is known to Colonel Mannering. I went cut to India to be a clerk in a Dutch house. Their affairs fell into confusion. I betook myself to the military profession, and I trust as yet I have not disgraced it. Thou art a fine young fellow, ill be bound for thee, said Playdell, and since you have wanted a father so long, I wish from my heart I could claim the paternity myself, but this affair of young Haslewood was merely accidental, said Bertram. I was travelling in Scotland for pleasure, and after a week's residence with my friend, Mr. Dinmont, with whom I had the good fortune to form an accidental acquaintance. It was my good fortune that, said Dinmont, ard my brains wad, hae been knockit out by 2 blackguards, if it hadna been for his 4 quarters. Shortly after we parted at the town of I lost my baggage by thieves, and it was while residing at Kippletringan, I accidentally met the young gentleman as I was approaching to pay my respects to Miss Mannering, whom I had known in India. Mr. Haslewood, conceiving my appearance none of the most respectable, commanded me rather haughtily to stand back, and so gave occasion to the fray, in which I had the misfortune to be the accidental means of wounding him. And now, sir, that I have answered all your questions. No, not quite all, said Playdell, winking sagaciously. There are some interrogatories which I shall delay till tomorrow, for it is time, I believe, to close the sederunt for this night, or rather morning. Well then, sir, said the young man, to vary the phrase, since I have answered all the questions which you have chosen to ask tonight, will you be so good as to tell me who you are that take such interest in my affairs, and whom you take me to be, since my arrival has occasioned such commotion? Why, sir, for myself, replied the counsellor, I am Paulus Playdell, an advocate at the Scottish bar, and for you it is not easy to say distinctly who you are at present, but I trust in a short time to hail you by the title of Henry Bertram-esque representative of one of the oldest families in Scotland, an heir of Talesy and provision to the estate of Ellengowan. I continued, be shutting his eyes and speaking to himself. We must pass over his father, and serve him heir to his grandfather Lewis, the entailer, the only wise man of his family that I ever heard of. They had now risen to retire to their apartments for the night when Colonel Mannering walked up to Bertram, as he stood astonished at the counsellor's words. I give you joy, he said, of the prospects which fate has opened before you. I was an early friend of your father, and chanced to be in the house of Ellengowan as unexpectedly as you are now in mine upon the very night in which you were born. I little knew this circumstance, when but I trust unkindness will be forgotten between us. Believe me, your appearance here, as Mr. Brown alive and well, has relieved me from most painful sensations, and your right to the name of an old friend renders your presence, as Mr. Bertram, doubly welcome. And my parents, said Bertram, are both no more, and the family property has been sold, but I trust may be recovered. Whatever is wanted to make your right effectual, I shall be most happy to supply. Nay, you may leave all that to me, said the counsellor. Tease my vocation, Hal, I shall make money of it. I'm sure it's no for the like o' me, observed Dinmont, to speak to you gentlefolks, but if Siller would help on the captain's plea, and they say nay plea gangs and wheel without it. Except on Saturday night, said Playdell. Aye, but when your honour wadna take your fee, you wadna hae the cause neither sae ill near fash you on a Saturday at een again. But I was saying there's some siller in the spluchen. A spluchen is a tobacco pouch, occasionally used as a purse, that's like the captain's ain, for we've I counted it, such baith Ailey and me. No, Liddy's delino occasion, no occasion whatever. Keep thy cash to stock thy farm. To stack my farm, Mr. Playdell, your honour kens money things, but ye dinna ken the farm o' Charlishopit's sae we'll stock it, already that we sell maybe sacks £100 off it ilka year flesh, and fell the githern na. Can't you take another then? I dinna ken the dukes know that fond o' lead farms, and he can abide to put away the old tenantry, and then I wadna like mysel to gang about whistling, and raising the rent on my neighbours. Whistling among the tenantry of a large estate is when an individual gives such information to the proprietor or his managers as to occasion the rent of his neighbours' farms being raised, which for obvious reasons is held a very unpopular practice. What not upon thy neighbour at Dawston Devilstone, how die call the place? What on Jock o' Dawston Hout, nas a campstery obstinate, and unruly chield and fascious troublesome about marches and weave, had some bits o' splores the gither, but deal o' me if I wad rang Jock o' Dawston neither. Thou'rt an honest fellow, said the lawyer, get thee to bed, thou wilt sleep sounder. I warrant thee than many a man that throws off an embroidered coat, and puts on a laced nightcap. Colonel, I see you are busy with our infant Truve, but Barnes must give me a summons of wakening at 7 tomorrow morning, for my servant's a sleepy-headed fellow, and I dare say my clerk-driver has had Clarence's fate, and is drowned by this time in a butt of your ale, for Mrs. Allen promised to make him comfortable and shall soon discover what he expects from that engagement. Good night, Colonel. Good night, Dominie Sampson. Good night, Dinmont. The downright good night, last of all, to the new-found representative of the Bertrams, and the Mac Dingawayers, the Norths, the Arths, the Godfreys, the Dennises, and the Rowlands, and last and dearest title heir of Talesy and provision of the lands and barony of Ellengowan, under the settlement of Lewis Bertram-esque, whose representative you are. And saucying, the old gentleman took his candle and left the room, and the company dispersed after the Dominie had once more hugged and embraced his little Harry Bertram, as he continued to call the young soldier of 6 feet high. Chapter Roman 51. My imagination carries no favour in it but Bertram's. I am undone, there is no living none if Bertram be away. All's well that ends well. At the hour which he had appointed the preceding evening, the indefatigable lawyer was seated by a good fire, and a pair of wax candles with a velvet cap on his head, and a quilted silk nightgown on his person, busy, arranging his memoranda of proofs and indications concerning the murder of Frank Kennedy. An express had also been dispatched to Mr. Macmorlan, requesting his attendance at Woodbourne, as soon as possible on business of importance. Dinmont, fatigued with the events of the evening before and finding the accommodations of Woodbourne much preferable to those of Mac Guffog, was in no hurry to rise. The impatience of Bertram might have put him earlier in motion, but Colonel Mannering had intimated an intention to visit him in his apartment in the morning, and he did not choose to leave it before this interview. He had dressed himself, Barnes, having by his master's orders supplied him with every accommodation of linen, etc., and now anxiously waited the promised visit of his landlord. In a short time a gentle tap announced the Colonel, with whom Bertram held a long and satisfactory conversation, each however concealed from the other one circumstance. Mannering could not bring himself to acknowledge the astrological prediction, and Bertram was, from motives which may be easily conceived, silent respecting his love for Julia. In other respects their intercourse was frank and grateful to both, and had latterly upon the Colonel's part even an approach to cordiality. Bertram carefully measured his own conduct by that of his host, and seemed rather to receive his offered kindness with gratitude and pleasure than to press for it with solicitation. Miss Bertram was in the breakfast parlour when Sampson shuffled in his face, all radiant with smiles, a circumstance so uncommon that Lucy's first idea was that somebody had been bantering him with an imposition which had thrown him into this ecstasy. Having sat for some time rolling his eyes and gaping with his mouth like the great wooden head at Merlin's exhibition, he at length began, "And what do you think of him, Miss Lucy?" "Think of whom, Mr. Sampson?" asked the young lady. "Of Harnoof, him that you know about again," demanded the Dominie. That I know about, replied Lucy, totally at a loss to comprehend his meaning. Yes, the stranger you know that came last evening in the post-vehicle, who shot young Haslewood ha-ha-ho, burst forth the Dominie with a laugh that sounded like neighing. Indeed, Mr. Sampson, said his pupil, you have chosen a strange subject for mirth. I think nothing about the man, only I hope the outrage was accidental, and that we need not fear a repetition of it. Accidental, ho-ho-ha, again whinnied Sampson. Really, Mr. Sampson, said Lucy, somewhat piqued, you are unusually gay this morning. Yes, of a surety, I am. I ha-ha-ho facetious ho-ho-ha. So unusually facetious, my dear sir, pursued the young lady, that I would wish rather to know the meaning of your mirth, than to be amused with its effects only. You shall know it, Miss Lucy, replied poor Abel. Do you remember your brother? Good God, how can you ask me? No one knows better than you he was lost the very day I was born. Very true, answered the Dominie, saddening at the recollection. I was strangely oblivious, I too true, but you remember your worthy father. How should you doubt it, Mr. Sampson? It is not so many weeks since. Too true, replied the Dominie, his Howie-Hindnam laugh, sinking into a hysterical giggle. I will be facetious no more under these remembrances, but look at that young man. Bertram at this instant entered the room. Yes, look at him. Well, he is your father's living image, and as God has deprived you of your dear parent, so, my children, love one another. It is indeed my father's face and form, said Lucy, turning very pale. Bertram ran to support her. The Dominie to fetch water to throw upon her face, which in his haste he took from the boiling towen. Fortunately her colour, returning rapidly, saved her from the application of this ill-judged remedy. I conjure you yet to tell me, Mr. Sampson, she said, in an interrupted solemn voice, is this my brother? It is Miss Lucy, it is little Harry Bertram, as sure as God's Son is in that heaven. And this is my sister, said Bertram, giving way to all that family affection which had so long slumbered in his bosom, for want of an object to expand itself upon. Is Miss Lucy Bertram, ejaculated Sampson, whom by my poor age you will find perfect in the tongues of France and Italy, and even of Spain in reading and writing her vernacular tongue, and in arithmetic and bookkeeping by double and single entry. I say nothing of her talents of shaping and hemming and governing household, which to give everyone there do she acquired not from me, but from the housekeeper do. I take merit for her performance upon stringed instruments, whereunto the instructions of an honourable young lady of virtue and modesty, and very facetious withal, Miss Julia Mannering, hath not meanly contributed suum cuique trabile. You then, said Bertram to his sister, are all that remains to me. Last night, but more fully this morning, Colonel Mannering gave me an account of our family misfortunes, though without saying I should find my sister here. That, said Lucy, he left to this gentleman to tell you, one of the kindest and most faithful of friends, who soothed my father's long sickness, witnessed his dying moments, and amid the heaviest clouds of fortune would not desert his orphan. God bless him for it, said Bertram, shaking the Dominie's hand. He deserves the love with which I have always regarded even that dim and imperfect shadow of his memory, which my childhood retained. And God bless you both, my dear children, said Sampson. If it had not been for your sake, I would have been contented, had heaven's pleasure so been, to lay my head upon the turf beside my patron. But I trust, said Bertram, I am encouraged to hope we shall all see better days, all our wrongs shall be redressed, since heaven has sent me means and friends to assert my right. Friends, indeed, echoed the Dominie, and sent, as you truly say, by him to whom I early taught you to look up as the source of all that is good. There is the great Colonel Mannering from the Eastern Indies, a man of war from his birth upwards, but who is not the less a man of great erudition considering his imperfect opportunities, and there is moreover the great advocate Mr. Pleydell, who is also a man of great erudition, but who descendeth to trifles unbeseeming thereof, and there is Mr. Andrew Dinmont, whom I do not understand to have possession of much erudition, but who, like the patriarchs of old, is cunning in that which belongeth to flocks and herds. Lastly, there is even I myself, whose opportunities of collecting erudition, as they have been greater than those of the aforesaid valuable persons, have not, if it becomes me to speak, been pretermitted by me, in so far as my poor faculties have enabled me to profit by them. Of a surety, little Harry, we must speedily resume our studies. I will begin from the foundation. I will reform your education upward, from the true knowledge of English grammar, even to that of the Hebrew or Chaldaic tongue. The reader may observe that upon this occasion Sampson was infinitely more profuse of words than he had hitherto exhibited himself. The reason was that in recovering his pupil, his mind went instantly back to their original connection, and he had in his confusion of ideas the strongest desire in the world to resume spelling lessons and half-text with young Bertram. This was the more ridiculous as towards Lucy he assumed no snob powers of tuition, but she had grown up under his eye, and had been gradually emancipated from his government by increase in years and knowledge, and a latent sense of his own inferior tact in manners, whereas his first ideas went to take up Harry pretty nearly where he had left him. From the same feelings of reviving authority, he indulged himself in what was to him a profusion of language, and as people seldom speak more than usual without exposing themselves, he gave those whom he addressed plainly to understand that while he deferred implicitly to the opinions and commands, if they chose to impose them, of almost everyone whom he met with, it was under an internal conviction that in the article of erudition, as he usually pronounced the word, he was infinitely superior to them, all put together. At present, however, this intimation fell upon heedless cars, for the brother and sister were too deeply engaged in asking and receiving intelligence concerning their former fortunes to attend much to the worthy Dominie. When Colonel Mannering left Bertram, he went to Julia's dressing-room and dismissed her attendant. "My dear sir," she said as he entered, "you have forgot our vigils last night, and have hardly allowed me time to comb my hair, although you must be sensible how it stood on end at the various wonders which took place. It is with the inside of your head that I have some business at present, Julia. I will return the outside to the care of your Mrs. Mincing in a few minutes." "Lord Papa," replied Miss Mannering, "think how entangled all my ideas are. And you to propose to comb them out in a few minutes. If Mrs. Mincing were to do so in her department, she would tear half the hair out of my head." "Well then, tell me," said the Colonel, "where the entanglement lies, which I will try to extricate with due gentleness." "Oh, everywhere," said the young lady. "The whole is a wild dream." "Well then, I will try to unriddle it." He gave a brief sketch of the fate and prospects of Bertram, to which Julia listened with an interest which she in vain endeavoured to disguise. "Well," concluded her father, "are your ideas on the subject more luminous?" "More confused than ever, my dear sir," said Julia. "Here is this young man come from India, after he had been supposed dead, like a Balfourus the great voyager to his sister Cansade, and his provident brother I am wrong id the story, I believe Cansade was his wife, but Lucy may represent the one, and the Dominie the other. And then this lively crack-brained Scotch lawyer appears like a pantomime at the end of a tragedy, and then how delightful it will be if Lucy gets back her fortune." "Now I think," said the Colonel, "that the most mysterious part of the business is that Miss Julia Mannering, who must have known her father's anxiety about the fate of this young man Brown, or Bertram, as we must now call him, should have met him when Haslewood's accident took place, and never once mentioned to her father a word of the matter, but suffered the search to proceed against this young gentleman as a suspicious character and assassin." Julia, much of whose courage had been hastily assumed to meet the interview with her father, was now unable to rally herself. She hung down her head in silence, after in vain attempting to utter a denial that she recollected Brown when she met him. "No answer. Well, Julia," continued her father gravely, "but kindly allow me to ask you, is this the only time you have seen Brown since his return from India?" Still no answer. "I must then naturally suppose that it is not the first time." Still no reply. "Julia Mannering, will you have the kindness to answer me, was it this young man who came under your window and conversed with you during your residence at Mervyn Hall?" "Julia, I entreat you to be candid." Miss Mannering raised her head. "I have been, sir. I believe I am still very foolish, and it is perhaps more hard upon me that I must meet this gentleman who has been, though not the cause entirely, yet the accomplice of my folly in your presence here." She made a full stop. "I am to understand, then," said Mannering, "that this was the author of the serenade at Mervyn Hall?" There was something in this elusive change of epithet that gave Julia a little more courage. "He was indeed, sir, and if I am very wrong, as I have often thought, I have some apology." "And what is that?" answered the Colonel, speaking quick, and with something of harshness. "I will not venture to name it, sir, but," she opened a small cabinet and put some letters into his hands, "I will give you these that you may see how this intimacy began, and by whom it was encouraged." Mannering took the packet to the window. His pride forbade a more distant retreat, glanced at some passages of the letters with an unsteady eye, and an agitated mind. His stoicism, however, came in time to his aid, that philosophy which, rooted in pride, yet frequently bears the fruits of virtue. He returned towards his daughter with as firm an air as his feelings permitted him to assume. "There is great apology for you, Julia, as far as I can judge from a glance at these letters. You have obeyed at least one parent, Let us adopt a Scotch proverb the Dominie quoted the other day, let bygones be bygones, and fair play for the future. I will never upbraid you with your past want of confidencido. You judge of my future intentions by my actions, of which hitherto you have surely had no reason to complain. Keep these letters, they were never intended for my eye, and I would not willingly read more of them than I have done at your desire, and for your exculpation. And now are we friends, or rather do you understand me? Oh, my dear generous father, said Julia, throwing herself into his arms, why have I ever for an instant misunderstood you? No more of that, Julia, said the colonel, we have both been to blame. He that is too proud to vindicate the affection and confidence which he conceives should be given without solicitation, must meet much, and perhaps deserved disappointment. It is enough that one dearest and most regretted member of my family has gone to the grave, without knowing me. Let me not lose the confidence of a child who ought to love me, if she really loves herself. Oh, no danger, no fear, answered Julia, let me but have your approbation and my own, and there is no role you can prescribe so severe that I will not fall. Well, my love, kissing her forehead, it trust, we shall not call upon you for anything too heroic, with respect to this young gentleman's addresses. I expect, in the first place, that all clandestine correspondence which no young woman can entertain for a moment without lessening herself in her own eyes, and in those of her lover, I request, I say, that clandestine correspondence of every kind may be given up, and that you will refer Mr. Bertram to me, for the reason you will naturally wish to know what is to be the issue of such a reference. In the first place, I desire to observe this young gentleman's character more closely than circumstances, and perhaps my own prejudices have permitted formerly. I should also be glad to see his birth established, not that I am anxious about his getting the estate of Ellangowan, though such a subject is held in absolute indifference nowhere, except in a novel, but certainly Henry Bertram, heir of Ellangowan, whether possessed of the property of his ancestors or not, is a very different person from Van Beest Brown, the son of nobody at all. His fathers, Mr. Playdell tells me, are distinguished in history as following the banners of their native princes, while our own fought at Cressy and Poictiers. In short, I neither give nor withhold my approbation, but I expect you will redeem past errors, and as you can now unfortunately only have recourse to one parent, that you will show the duty of a child, by reposing that confidence in me, which I will say my inclination to make you happy renders a filial debt upon your part. The first part of this speech affected Julia a good deal. The comparative merit of the ancestors of the Bertrams and Mannerings excited a secret smile, but the conclusion was such as to soften a heart peculiarly open to the feelings of generosity. No, my dear sir, she said, extending her hand, receive my faith that from this moment you shall be the first person consulted respecting what shall pass in future between Bertram and me, and that no engagement shall be undertaken by me, excepting what you shall immediately know and approve of. May I ask if Mr. Bertram is to continue a guest at Woodbourne? Certainly, said the colonel, while his affairs render it advisable. Then, sir, you must be sensible, considering what is already past, that he will expect some reason for my withdrawing. I believe, I must say, the encouragement which he may think I have given. I expect, Julia, answered Mannering, that he will respect my roof, and entertain some sense perhaps of the services I am desirous to render him, and so will not insist upon any course of conduct of which I might have reason to complain, and I expect of you that you will make him sensible of what is due to both. Then, sir, I understand you, and you shall be implicitly obeyed. Thank you, my love. My anxiety, kissing her, is on your account now. Wipe these witnesses from your eyes, and so to breakfast. Chapter Roman 52, and Sheriff, I will engage my word to you that I will by tomorrow dinner time send him to answer thee or any man for anything he shall he charged withal. Henry Roman 4 Part Roman 1. When the several byplays, as they may be termed, had taken place among the individuals of the Woodbourne family, as we have intimated in the preceding chapter, the breakfast party at length assembled, Dandy excepted, who had consulted his taste in viands and perhaps in society, by partaking of a cup of tea with Mrs. Allen, just laced with 2 teaspoonfuls of cognac, and reinforced with various slices from a huge round of beef. He had a kind of feeling that he could eat twice as much and speak twice as much with this good dame and Barnes, as with the grand folk in the parlour. Indeed, the meal of this less distinguished party was much more mirthful than that in the higher circle, where there was an obvious air of constraint on the greater part of the assistants. Julia dared not raise her voice in asking Bertram if he chose another cup of tea. Bertram felt embarrassed, while eating his toast and butter under the eye of Mannering. Lucy, while she indulged to the uttermost her affection for her recovered brother, began to think of the quarrel betwixt him and Haslewood the colonel felt the painful anxiety natural to a proud mind, when it deems its slightest action subject, for a moment, to the watchful construction of others. The lawyer, while sedulously buttering his roll, had an aspect of unwonted gravity, arising perhaps from the severity of his morning studies. As for the Dominie, his state of mind was ecstatic. He looked at Bertram, looked at Lucy, whimpered, sniggled, grinned, committed all manner of solecisms, in point of form poured the whole cream, no unlucky mistake, upon the plate of porridge, which was his own usual breakfast, threw the slops of what he called his crowning dish of tea into the sugar dish instead of the slop basin, and concluded with spilling the scalding liquor upon old Plato, the colonel's favourite spaniel, who received the libation with a howl that did little honour to his philosophy. The colonel's equanimity was rather shaken by this last blunder. Upon my word, my good friend Mr. Sampson, you forget the difference between Plato and Xenocrates. The former was chief of the academics, the latter of the Stoics, said the Dominie with some scorn of the supposition. Yes, my dear sir, but it was Xenocrates, not Plato, who denied that pain was an evil. I should have thought, said Playdell, that very respectable quadruped, which is just now limping out of the room upon 3 of his 4 legs, was rather of the cynic school. Very well hit off, but here comes an answer from Macmorlan. It was unfavourable. Mrs. Macmorlan sent her respectful compliments, and her husband had been, and was detained by some alarming disturbances which had taken place the preceding night at Portonferry, and the necessary investigation which they had occasioned. What's to be done now, counsellor? Said the colonel to Playdell. Why, I wish we could have seen Macmorlan, said the counsellor, who is a sensible fellow himself, and would besides have acted under my advice. But there is little harm. Our friend here must be made soi juridique, is at present an escaped prisoner. The law has an awkward claim upon him. He must be placed rectus in curia. That is the first object, for which purpose, Colonel, I will accompany you in your carriage down to Haslewood House. The distance is not great. We will offer our bail, and I am confident I can easily show Mr. I beg his pardon, Sir Robert Haslewood, the necessity of receiving it. With all my heart, said the colonel, and ringing the bell gave the necessary orders. And what is next to be done? We must get hold of Macmorlan and look out for more proof. Proof, said the colonel, the thing is as clear as daylight. Here are Mr. Sampson and Miss Bertram, and you yourself at once recognise the young gentleman as his father's image, and he himself recollects all the very peculiar circumstances preceding his leaving this country. What else is necessary to conviction? To moral conviction, nothing more perhaps, said the experienced lawyer, but for legal proof a great deal. Mr. Bertram's recollections are his own recollections merely, and therefore are not evidence in his own favour. Miss Bertram, the learned Mr. Sampson, and I can only say what everyone who knew the late Ellengowan will readily agree in, that this gentleman is his very picture, but that will not make him Ellengowan's son, and give him the estate. And what will do so? Said the colonel. Why, we must have a distinct probation. There are these gypsies, but then alas, they are almost infamous in the eye of law, scarce capable of bearing evidence, and Meg Merrilies, utterly so by the various accounts which she formerly gave of the matter, and her impudent denial of all knowledge of the fact when I myself examined her respecting it. What must be done then? Asked Mannering. We must try, answered the legal sage, what proof can be got at in Holland among the persons by whom our young friend was educated, but then the fear of being called in question for the murder of the gauger may make them silent, or if they speak, they are either foreigners or outlawed smugglers. In short, I see doubts. Under favour, most learned and honoured sir, said the Dominie, I trust he who hath restored little Harry Bertram to his friends will not leave his own work imperfect. I trust so too, Mr. Sampson, said Playdell, but we must use the means, and I am afraid we shall have more difficulty in procuring them than I at first thought. But a faint heart never won a fair lady, and, by the way, apart to Miss Mannering, while Bertram was engaged with his sister, there's a vindication of Holland for you. What smart fellows do you think Leyden and Utrecht must send forth, when such a very genteel and handsome young man comes from the paltry schools of Middelburg? Of a verity, said the Dominie, jealous of the reputation of the Dutch seminary, of a verity, Mr. Playdell, but I make it known to you that I myself laid the foundation of his education. True, my dear Dominie, answered the advocate, that accounts for his proficiency in the graces, without question. But here comes your carriage, Colonel. Adieu, young folks. Miss Julia, keep your heart till I come back. Aginlit, there be nothing done to prejudice my right, whilst I am non-volens ager. Their reception at Haslewood House was more cold and formal than usual, for in general the baronet expressed great respect for Colonel Mannering, And Mr. Pleydell, besides being a man of good family, and of high general estimation, was Sir Robert's old friend. But now he seemed dry and embarrassed in his manner. He would willingly, he said, receive bail notwithstanding that the offence had been directly committed, and done against young Haslewood of Haslewood. But the young man had given himself a fictitious description, and was altogether that sort of person who should not be liberated, discharged, or let loose upon society, and therefore— "I hope, Sir Robert Haslewood," said the Colonel, "you do not mean to doubt my word, when I assure you that he served under me as a cadet in India." "By no means or account whatsoever, but you call him a cadet now. He says, avers, and upholds that he was a captain or held a troop in your regiment. He was promoted since I gave up the command." "But you must have heard of it." "No, I returned on account of family circumstances from India, and have not since been solicitous to hear particular news from the regiment. The name of Brown, too, is so common that I might have seen his promotion in the Gazette without noticing it, but a day or two will bring letters from his commanding officer." "But I am told and informed," Mr. Pleydell answered Sir Robert, still hesitating, "that he does not mean to abide by this name of Brown, but is to set up a claim to the estate of Ellangowan under the name of Bertram." "Aye, who says that?" said the counsellor. "Or," demanded the soldier, "whoever says so, does that give a right to keep him in prison?" "Hush, Colonel," said the lawyer, "I am sure you would not any more than I countenance him, if he prove an impostor and among friends. Who informed you of this, Sir Robert?" "Why, a person, Mr. Pleydell," answered the baronet, "who is peculiarly interested in investigating, sifting, and clearing out this business to the bottom. You will excuse my being more particular." "Oh, certainly," replied Pleydell, "and he says that it is whispered about among tinkers, gypsies, and other idle persons, that there is such a plan as I mentioned to you, and that this young man, who is a bastard or natural son of the late Ellangowan, is pitched upon as the impostor from his strong family likeness." "And was there such a natural son, Sir Robert?" demanded the counsellor. "Oh, certainly, to my own positive knowledge Ellangowan had him placed as cabin boy or powder monkey on board an armed sloop, or yacht belonging to the revenue, through the interest of the late Commissioner Bertram, a kinsman of his own." "Well, Sir Robert," said the lawyer, taking the word out of the mouth of the impatient soldier, "you have told me news. I shall investigate them, and I find them true, certainly, Colonel Mannering, and I will not countenance this young man in the meanwhile, as we are all willing to make him forthcoming to answer all complaints against him. I do assure you will act most illegally, and incur heavy responsibility if you refuse our bail." "Why, Mr. Pleydell," said Sir Robert, who knew the high authority of the counsellor's opinion, "as you must know best, and as you promise to give up this young man." "If he proves an impostor," replied the lawyer with some emphasis. "I certainly, under that condition, I will take your bail, though I must say an obliging, well-disposed, and civil neighbour of mine, who was himself bred to the law, gave me a hint or caution this morning against doing so. It was from him I learned that this youth was liberated, and had come abroad, or rather had broken prison. But where shall we find one to draw the bail bond?" "Here," said the counsellor, applying himself to the bell, "send up my clerk, Mr. Driver. It will not do my character harm if I dictate the needful myself." It was written accordingly and signed, and the justice having subscribed a regular warrant for Bertram alias Brown's discharge, the visitors took their leave. Each threw himself into his own corner of the posturiate, and said nothing for some time. The Colonel first broke silence. "So you intend to give up this poor young fellow at the first brush?" "Who I," replied the counsellor, "I will not give up one hair of his head, though I should follow them to the court of last resort in his behalf. But what signified mooting points, and showing one's hand to that old ass? Much better he should report to his prompter Glossin that we are indifferent or lukewarm in the matter. Besides, I wish to have a peep at the enemy's game." "Indeed," said the soldier, "then I see there are stratagems in law as well as war. Well, and how do you like their line of battle?" "Ingenious," said Mr. Pleydell, "but I think desperately are finessing too much a common fault on such occasions." During this discourse, the carriage rolled rapidly towards Woodbourne without anything occurring worthy of the reader's notice excepting their meeting with young Haslewood, to whom the Colonel told the extraordinary history of Bertram's reappearance, which he heard with high delight, and then rode on before to pay Miss Bertram his compliments on an event so happy and so unexpected. We return to the party at Woodbourne. After the departure of Mannering, the conversation related chiefly to the fortunes of the Ellangowan family, their domains, and their former power. "It was then under the towers of my fathers," said Bertram, that I landed some days since in circumstances much resembling those of a vagabond, its mouldering turrets and darksome arches, even then awakened thoughts of the deepest interest and recollections, which I was unable to decipher. I will now visit them again with other feelings, and I trust other and better hopes. Do not go there now, said his sister. The house of our ancestors is at present the habitation of a wretch, as insidious as dangerous, whose arts and villainy accomplished the ruin, and broke the heart of our unhappy father. You increase my anxiety, replied her brother, to confront this miscreant. Even in the den he has constructed for himself I think I have seen him. But you must consider, said Julia, that you are now left under Lucy's guard and mine, and are responsible to us for all your motions. Consider, I have not been a lawyer's mistress 12 hours for nothing, and I assure you it would be madness to attempt to go to Ellangowan just now. The utmost to which I can consent is that we shall walk in a body to the head of the Woodbourne Avenue, and from that perhaps we may indulge you with our company as far as a rising ground in the common, whence your eyes may be blessed with a distant prospect of those gloomy towers, which struck so strongly your sympathetic imagination. The party was speedily agreed upon, and the ladies, having taken their cloaks, followed the route proposed under the escort of Captain Bertram. It was a pleasant winter morning, and the cool breeze served only to freshen, not to chill the fair walkers. A secret, though unacknowledged bond of kindness combined the two ladies, and Bertram, now hearing the interesting accounts of his own family, now communicating his adventures in Europe and in India, repaid the pleasure which he received. Lucy felt proud of her brother, as well from the bold and manly turn of his sentiments, as from the dangers he had encountered, and the spirit with which he had surmounted them, and Julia, while she pondered on her father's words, could not help entertaining hopes that the independent spirit, which had seemed to her father presumption in the humble and plebeian Brown, would have the grace of courage, noble bearing, and high blood in the far-descended heir of Ellangowan. They reached at length the little eminence or knoll upon the highest part of the common called Gibbesnoya spot, repeatedly mentioned in this history, as being on the skirts of the Ellangowan estate. It commanded a fair variety of hill and dale, bordered with natural woods, whose naked boughs at this season relieved the general colour of the landscape with a dark purple hue, while in other places the prospect was more formally intersected by lines of plantation, where the Scotch firs displayed their variety of dusky green. At the distance of 2 or 3 miles lay the Bay of Ellangowan, its waves rippling under the influence of the western breeze. The towers of the ruined castle seen high over every object in the neighbourhood received a brighter colouring from the wintry sun. There, said Lucy Bertram, pointing them out in the distance, there is the seat of our ancestors. God knows, my dear brother, I do not covet in your behalf the extensive power which the lords of these ruins are said to have possessed so long, and sometimes to have used so. Roman 99, but oh that I might see you in possession of such relics of their fortune as should give you an honourable independence, and enable you to stretch your hand for the protection of the old and destitute dependents of our family, whom our poor father's death. True, my dearest Lucy, answered the young heir of Ellangowan, and I trust with the assistance of Heaven, which has so far guided us, and with that of these good friends, whom their own generous hearts have interested in my behalf, such a consummation of my hard adventures is now not unlikely. But as a soldier, I must look with some interest upon that worm-eaten hold of Ragged Stone, and if this undermining scoundrel, who is now in possession, dare to displace a pebble of it. He was here interrupted by Dinmont, who came hastily after them up the road unseen, till he was near the party. Captain Yer wanted by her, ye ken. And immediately Meg Merrilies, as if emerging out of the earth, ascended from the hollow way and stood before them. I sought ye at the house, she said, and found, but him, pointing to Dinmont, but ye are right, and I was rang it is here we should meet, on this very spot, where my eyes last saw your father. Remember your promise and follow me. Chapter Roman 53, to hail the king in seemly sought the lady was full fain. But King Arthur, all sore amazed, no answer made again. What wight art thou, the lady said, that will not speak to me? Sir, I may chance to ease thy pain, though I be foul to see. The marriage of Sir Gawain. The fairy bride of Sir Gawain, while under the influence of the spell of her wicked stepmother, was more decrepit probably, and what is commonly called more ugly than Meg Merrilies, but I doubt if she possessed that wild sublimity which an excited imagination communicated to features marked and expressive in their own peculiar character, and to the gestures of a form which her sex considered might be termed gigantic. Accordingly, the Knights of the Round Table did not recoil with more terror from the apparition of the loathly lady, placed between an oak and a green Harley than Lucy Bertram and Julia Mannering did from the appearance of this Galwegian sibyl upon the common of Ellangowan. For God's sake, said Julia, pulling out her purse, give that dreadful woman something and bid her go away. I cannot, said Bertram, I must not offend her. What keeps you here, said Meg, exalting the harsh and rough tones of her hollow voice. Why do you not follow? Must your hour call you twice? Do you remember your oath, were it at kirk, or market wedding, or burialand? She held high her skinny forefinger in a menacing attitude. Bertram turned round to his terrified companions. Excuse me for a moment, I am engaged by a promise to follow this woman. Good heavens, engaged to a madwoman, said Julia. Or to a gypsy, who has her band in the wood ready to murder you, said Lucy. That was not spoken like a bairn of Ellangowan, said Meg, frowning upon Miss Bertram. It is the ill-doers are ill-dreeders. In short, I must go, said Bertram. It is absolutely necessary. Wait for me 5 minutes on this spot. 5 minutes, said the gypsy. 5 hours may not bring you here again. Do you hear that, said Julia. For heaven's sake, do not go. I must. Mr. Dinmont will protect you back to the house. No, said Meg, he must come with you. It is for that he is here. He maun take part, why hand and heart, and weel his part. It is for redding his quarrel might have cost you dear. Troth lucky, it's very true, said the steady farmer, and ere I turn back frae the captain's side, ill show that I heena forgotten't. Oh yes, exclaimed both the ladies at once. Let Mr. Dinmont go with you if go you must on this strange summons. Indeed I must, answered Bertram, but you see I am safely guarded. Ado for a short time, go home as fast as you can. He pressed his sister's hand, and took a yet more affectionate farewell of Julia, with his eyes almost stupefied with surprise and fear. The young ladies watched with anxious looks the course of Bertram his companion, and their extraordinary guide. Her tall figure moved across the wintry heath, with steps so swift, so long, and so steady that she appeared rather to glide than to walk. Bertram and Dinmont, both tall men, apparently scarce equalled her in height owing to her longer dress and high headgear. She proceeded straight across the common, without turning aside to the winding path, by which passengers avoided the inequalities and little rills that traversed it in different directions. Thus the diminishing figures often disappeared from the eye, as they dived into such broken ground, and again ascended to sight when they were past the hollow. There was something frightful and unearthly, as it were, in the rapid and undeviating course which she pursued, undeterred by any of the impediments which usually incline a traveller from the direct path. Her way was as straight and nearly as swift as that of a bird through the air. At length they reached those thickets of natural wood, which extended from the skirts of the common towards the glades and brook of Dernclug, and were there lost to the view. This is very extraordinary, said Lucy after a pause, and turning round to her companion. What can he have to do with that old hag? It is very frightful, answered Julia, and almost reminds me of the tales of sorceresses, witches, and evil genii, which I have heard in India. They believe there in a fascination of the eye by which those who possess it control the will and dictate the motions of their victims. What can your brother have in common with that fearful woman, that he should leave us obviously against his will to attend to her commands? At least, said Lucy, we may hold him safe from harm, for she would never have summoned that faithful creature Dinmont, of whose strength, courage, and steadiness Henry said so much, to attend upon an expedition where she projected evil to the person of his friend. And now let us go back to the house, till the Colonel returns. Perhaps Bertram may be back first. At any rate, the Colonel will judge what is to be done. Leaning then upon each other's arm, but yet occasionally stumbling between fear and the disorder of their nerves, they at length reached the head of the avenue. When they heard the tread of a horse behind, they started, for their ears were awake to every sound, and beheld, to their great pleasure, young Haswood. The Colonel will be here immediately, he said. I galloped on before to pay my respects to Miss Bertram, with the sincerest congratulations upon the joyful event which has taken place in her family. I long to be introduced to Captain Bertram, and to thank him for the well-deserved lesson he gave to my rashness and indiscretion. He has left us just now, said Lucy, and in a manner that has frightened us very much. Just at that moment the Colonel's carriage drove up, and on observing the ladies stopped, while Mannering and his learned counsel alighted and joined them. They instantly communicated the new cause of alarm. Meg Merrilies again, said the Colonel. She certainly is a most mysterious and unaccountable personage, but I think she must have something to impart to Bertram, to which she does not mean we should be privy. The devil take the bedlamite old woman, said the counsellor. Will she not let things take their course, prout de liege, but must always be putting in her oar in her own way? Then, I fear from the direction they took, They are going upon the Ellengowan estatithat. Rascal Glossin has shown us what ruffians he has at his disposal. I wish honest Liddesdale may be guard sufficient. If you please, said Hazelwood, I should be most happy to ride in the direction which they have taken. I am so well known in the country that I scarce think any outrage will be offered in my presence, and I shall keep at such a cautious distance as not to appear to watch Meg, or interrupt any communication which she may make. Upon my word, said Playdale aside to be a sprig, whom I remember with a whey face, and a satchel not so very many years ago, I think young Hazelwood grows a fine fellow. I am more afraid of a new attempt at legal oppression than at open violence, and from that this young man's presence would deter both Glossin and his understrappers. Hie away, then, my boy, peer out, yowl, find them somewhere about Dernclug, or very probably in Warrock Wood. Hazelwood turned his horse. Come back to us to dinner, Hazelwood, cried the colonel. He bowed, spurred his horse, and galloped off. We now returned to Bertram and Dinmont, who continued to follow their mysterious guide through the woods and dingles between the open common and the ruined hamlet of Dernclug. As she led the way, she never looked back upon her followers, unless to chide them for loitering, though the sweat in spite of the season poured from their brows. At other times she spoke to herself in such broken expressions as these: it is to rebuild the old house, it is to lay the cornerstone, and did I not warn him? I telled him I was born to do it. If my father's head had been the stepping stane, let alone his, I was doomed still. I kept my purpose in the cage, and in the stocks I was banished. I kept it in an unco land. I was scourged, I was branded. My resolution lay deeper than scourge or red iron could reach, and now the hour is come. Captain, said Dinmont in a half-whisper, I wish she binna uncanny mad. Her words dinna seem to come in God's name, or like other folks odd they threep declare in our country that there are sick things. Don't be afraid, my friend, whispered Bertram in return. Feared fiend to heat, not a whit care I, said the dauntless farmer. Be she witch or devil, it's a ain to Dandy Dinmont. Haud your peace, Gudeman, said Meg, looking sternly over her shoulder. Is this a time or place for you to speak, think ye? But my good friend, said Bertram, as I have no doubt in your good faith or kindness, which I have experienced, you should in return have some confidence in me. I wish to know where you are leading us. There's but I answer to that, Henry Bertram, said the Sibyl. I swore my tongue should never tell, but I never said my finger should never show. Go on and meet your fortune, or turn back and lose it, that's I hae to say. Go on then, answered Bertram, I will ask no more questions. They descended into the glen about the same place where Meg had formerly parted from Bertram. She paused an instant beneath the tall rock where he had witnessed the burial of a dead body, and stamped upon the ground, which, notwithstanding all the care that had been taken, showed vestiges of having been recently moved. Here rests ane, she said, hell may be hae neighbours soon. She then moved up the brook until she came to the ruined hamlet, where, pausing with a look of peculiar and softened interest before one of the gables which was still standing, she said, in a tone less abrupt though as solemn as before, do you see that blacket and broken end of a shealing hut there? My kettle boiled for 40 years there. I bore 12 bewardly sons and daughters. Where are they? Nowhere are the leaves that were on that old ash tree at Martinmas. The west wind has made it berry, and I'm stripped too. Do you see that sot tree? It's but a blackened rotten stump. Now I've sat under it mony bonny summer afternoon, when it hung its gay garlands o'er the poppling water. I've sat there, and elevating her voice, I've held you on my knee, Henry Bertram, and sung ye sangs of the old barons, and their bloody worset will ne'er be green again, and Meg Merrilies will never sing sangs mair, be they blithe or sad, but yell no forget her, and yell gar big up cause to be built up. The old was for her sake, and let somebody live there, that's ower gude to fear them of another wold. For if ever the dead came back amang the living, ill be seen in this glen mony, a night after these crazed banes are in the mould. The mixture of insanity and wild pathos with which she spoke these last words, with her right arm bare, and extended her left bent, and shrouded beneath the dark red drapery of her mantle, might have been a study worthy of our Siddons herself. And now, she said, resuming at once the short, stern, and hasty tone, which was most ordinary to her, let us to the walk. She then led the way to the promontory, on which the Kime of Dernclug was situated, produced a large key from her pocket, and unlocked the door. The interior of this place was in better order than formerly. I have made things decent, she said. I may be streakit stretched out here or night there, will be few at Meg's Lycuake watching over a corpse by night for money of our folk, will blame what I hae done and am to do. She then pointed to a table upon which was some cold meat arranged with more attention to neatness than could have been expected from Meg's habits. Eat, she said, eat, ye'll need it this night yet. Bertram in complacence ate a morsel or two, and Dinmont, whose appetite was unabated either by wonder apprehension or the meal of the morning, made his usual figure as a trencherman. She then offered each a single glass of spirits, which Bertram drank diluted, and his companion played. "Will ye taste neathing yourself lucky?" said Dinmont. "I shall not need it," replied their mysterious hostess. "And now," she said, "ye maun hae arms, I maun a gang on dry-handed, but use them not rashly take captive, but save lifelet the law hae its ain, maun speak ere he die." "Who is to be taken, who is to speak?" said Bertram in astonishment, receiving a pair of pistols, which she offered him, and which upon examining he found loaded and locked. "The flints are gude," she said, "and the powder dry. I ken this walk weel." Then, without answering his questions, she armed Dinmont also with a large pistol, and desired them to choose sticks for themselves out of a parcel of very suspicious-looking bludgeons which she brought from a corner. Bertram took a stout sapling, and Dandy selected a club which might have served Hercules himself. They then left the hut together, and in doing so Bertram took an opportunity to whisper to Dinmont, "There's something inexplicable in all this, but we need not use these arms, unless we see necessity and lawful occasion. Take care to do as you see me do." Dinmont gave a sagacious nod, and they continued to follow over wet and over dry, through bog, and through fallow, the footsteps of their conductress. She guided them to the wood of Warrock, by the same track which the late Ellengowan had used when riding to Dernclug in quest of his child, on the miserable evening of Kennedy's murder. When Meg Merrilies had attained these groves, through which the wintry sea wind was now whistling hoarse and shrill, she seemed to pause a moment, as if to recollect the way. "We maun go the precise track," she said, and continued to go forward, but rather in a zigzag and involved course than according to her former steady and direct line of motion. At length, she guided them through the mazes of the wood, to a little open glade of about 1/4 of an acre, surrounded by trees and bushes, which made a wild and irregular boundary. Even in winter it was a sheltered and snugly sequestered spot, but when arrayed in the verdure of spring, the earth sending forth all its wild flowers, the shrubs spreading their waste of blossom around it, and the weeping birches which towered over the underwood, drooping their long and leafy fibres to intercept the sun, it must have seemed a place for a youthful poet to study his earliest sonnet, or a pair of lovers to exchange their first mutual avowal of affection. Apparently, it now awakened very different recollections. Bertram's brow, when he had looked round the spot, became gloomy and embarrassed. Meg, after uttering to herself, "This is the very spot," looked at him with a ghastly side glance. "Do I mind it?" "Yes," answered Bertram imperfectly, "I do." "I pursued his guide on this very spot. The man fell from his horse. I was behind that birch bush at the very moment. Sir, he strove, and he cried for mercy, but he was in the hands of them that never kenned the word. Now will I show you the further track. Last time ye travelled it was in these arms." She led them accordingly by a long and winding passage almost overgrown with brushwood, until without any very perceptible descent, they suddenly found themselves by the seaside. Meg then walked very fast on between the surf and the rocks, until she came to a remarkable fragment of rock detached from the rest. "Here," she said in a low and scarcely audible whisper, "here the corpse was found." "And the cave," said Bertram in the same tone, "is close beside it. Are you guiding us there?" "Yes," said the gypsy in a decided tone. "Bend up both your hearts, follow me, as I creep in. I have placed the firewood, so as to screen you. Bide behind it for a gliff little, till I say the hour, and the man or baith come. Then rin in on him, take his arms, and bind him, till the blood burst frae his finger-nails." "I will, by my soul," said Henriette. "He is the man, I suppose, Jansen." "Aye, Jansen Hatteraick, and 20 mere names are his." "Dinmont, you must stand by me now," said Bertram, "for this fellow is a devil." "Ye needna doubt that," said the stout yeoman, "but I wish I could mind a bit prayer, or I creep after the witch into that hole, that she's opening. It wad be a sair thing to leave the blessed sun, and the free air and gang, and be killed like a tod that's run to earth in a dungeon like that. But my sooth, they will be hard bitten. Terriers will worry Dandy, so as I said, deal hae me if I balk you." This was uttered in the lowest tone of voice possible. The entrance was now open. Meg crept in upon her hands and knees. Bertram followed, and Dinmont, after giving a rueful glance toward the daylight whose blessings he was abandoning, brought up the rear. Chapter Roman 54. "Die prophet in thy speech, for this among the rest was I ordained." Henry Roman 6 Part Roman 3. The progress of the borderer, who, as we have said, was the last of the party, was fearfully arrested by a hand which caught hold of his leg, as he dragged his long limbs after him, in silence and perturbation, through the low and narrow entrance of the subterranean passage. The steel heart of the bold yeoman had well nigh given way, and he suppressed with difficulty a shout which in the defenceless posture and situation which they then occupied might have cost all their lives. He contented himself, however, with extricating his foot from the grasp of the unexpected follower. "Be still," said a voice behind him, releasing him. "I am a friend, Charles Haslewood." These words were uttered in a very low voice, but they produced sound enough to startle Meg Merrilies, who led the van, and who, having already gained the place where the cavern expanded, had risen upon her feet. She began, as if to confound any listening ear, to growl, to mutter, and to sing aloud, and at the same time to make a bustle among some brushwood which was now heaped in the cave. "Here, beldam Davils kind," growled the harsh voice of Dirk Hatteraick from the inside of his den, "what makest thou there? Laying the roughy's withered boughs to keep the cold wind frae you, ye desperate Donegood, ye're ower weel off, and what's na, it will be otherwise soon." "Have you brought me the brandy and any news of my people?" said Dirk Hatteraick. "Here's the flask for ye, your peopledis," said broken Gania, cut to ribbons by the redcoats. "Dare Davilth's coast is fatal to me. Ye may hae mair reason to say sae." While this dialogue went forward, Bertram and Dinmont had both gained the interior of the cave, and assumed an erect position. The only light which illuminated its rugged and sable precincts was a quantity of wood burnt to charcoal in an iron grate, such as they use in spearing salmon by night. On these red embers Hatteraick from time to time threw a handful of twigs or splintered wood, but these, even when they blazed up, afforded a light much disproportioned to the extent of the cavern, and as its principal inhabitant lay upon the side of the grate, most remote from the entrance, it was not easy for him to discover distinctly objects which lay in that direction. The intruders, therefore, whose number was now augmented unexpectedly to 3, stood behind the lucilipold branches, with little risk of discovery. Dinmont had the sense to keep back Haslewood with one hand, till he whispered to Bertram, "A friend, young Haslewood." It was no time for following up the introduction, and they all stood as still as the rocks around them, obscured behind the pile of brushwood, which had been probably placed there to break the cold wind from the sea without totally intercepting the supply of air. The branches were laid so loosely above each other that, looking through them towards the light of the fire grate, they could easily discover what passed in its vicinity, although a much stronger degree of illumination than it afforded would not have enabled the persons placed near the bottom of the cave to have descried them in the position which they occupied. The scene, independent of the peculiar moral interest and personal danger which attended it, had, from the effect of the light and shade on the uncommon objects which it exhibited, an appearance emphatically dismal. The light in the fire grate was the dark-red glare of charcoal in a state of ignition, relieved from time to time by a transient flame of a more vivid or duskier light. As the fuel with which Dirk Hatteraick fed his fire was better or worse fitted for his purpose, now a dark cloud of stifling smoke rose up to the roof of the cavern, and then lighted into a reluctant and sullen blaze, which flashed wavering up the pillar of smoke, and was suddenly rendered brighter and more lively by some drier fuel, or perhaps some splintered timber, which at once converted the smoke into flame by such fitful irradiation. They could see more or less distinctly the form of Hatteraick, whose savage and rugged cast of features now rendered yet more ferocious by the circumstances of his situation, and the deep gloom of his mind, assorted well with the rugged and broken vault, which rose in a rude arch over and around him. The form of Meg Merrilies, which stalked about him, sometimes in the light, sometimes partially obscured in the smoke or darkness, contrasted strongly with the sitting figure of Hatteraick as he bent over the flame, and from his stationary posture was constantly visible to the spectator, while that of the female flitted around, appearing or disappearing like a spectre. Bertram felt his blood boil at the sight of Hatteraick. He remembered him well under the name of Jansen, which the smuggler had adopted after the death of Kennedy, and he remembered also that this Jansen and his mate, Brown the same who was shot at Woodbourne, had been the brutal tyrants of his infancy. Bertram knew further, from piercing his own imperfect recollections with the narratives of Mannering and Pleydell, that this man was the prime agent in the act of violence which tore him from his family and country, and had exposed him to so many distresses and dangers. 1,000 exasperating reflections rose within his bosom, and he could hardly refrain from rushing upon Hatteraick and blowing his brains out. At the same time, this would have been no safe adventure. The flame, as it rose and fell, while it displayed the strong, muscular and broad-chested frame of the ruffian, glanced also upon 2 brace of pistols in his belt, and upon the hilt of his cutlass. It was not to be doubted that his desperation was commensurate with his personal strength and means of resistance. Both, indeed, were inadequate to encounter the combined power of two such men as Bertram himself and his friend Dinmont, without reckoning their unexpected assistant Hazelwood, who was unarmed and of a lighter make. But Bertram felt on a moment's reflection that there would be neither sense nor valour in anticipating the hangman's office, and he considered the importance of making Hatteraick prisoner alive. He therefore repressed his indignation, and awaited that should pass between the ruffian and his gypsy guide. "And how are ye now?" said the harsh and discordant tones of his female attendant. "Said I not it would come upon you I, and in this very cave where ye harboured after the deed?" "Wetter and sturm ye hag," replied Hatteraick, "keep your davils matins, till they're wanted. Have you seen Glossin?" "No," replied Meg Merrilies, "you've missed your blow, ye bloodspiller, and ye have nothing to expect from the tempter." "Hagel," exclaimed the ruffian, "if I had him, but by the throat, and what am I to do then?" "Do," answered the gypsy, "die like a man, or be hanged like a dog." "Hanged, ye hag of Satan, hemp's not sown that shall hang me." "LTS sown, and it's grown, and it's heckled, and it's twisted. Did I not tell ye when ye wad take away the boy Harry Bertram, in spite of my prayers did? I not say he would come back, when he had dreed his weird in foreign land, till his 21st year did. I not say the old fire would burn down to a spark, but wad kindle again." "Well, mother, you did say so," said Hatteraick in a tone that had something of despair in its accents, "and Donner and Blitzen, I believe you spoke the truth. That Junker of Ellengowan has been a rock ahead to me all my life, and now with Glossin's cursed contrivance my crew have been cut off, my boats destroyed, and I dare say the luggers taken there were not men enough left on board to work her, far less to fight her a dredgeboat might have taken her. And what will the owners say, Hagel and Sturm? I shall never dare go back again to Flushing." "You'll never need," said the gypsy. "What are you doing there?" said her companion, "and what makes you say that?" During this dialogue Meg was heaping some flax loosely together before answer to this question. She dropped a firebrand upon the flax, which had been previously steeped in some spirituous liquor, for it instantly caught fire, and rose in a vivid pyramid of the most brilliant light up to the very top of the vault. As it ascended, Meg answered the ruffian's question in a firm and steady voice, "Because the hour's come, and At the appointed signal Bertram and Dinmont sprung over the brushwood, and rushed upon Hatteraick. Hazelwood, unacquainted with their plan of assault, was a moment later the ruffian, who instantly saw he was betrayed, turned his first vengeance on Meg Merrilies, at whom he discharged a pistol. She fell with a piercing and dreadful cry between the shriek of pain and the sound of laughter, when at its highest and most suffocating height. "I kenned it would be this way," she said. Bertram in his haste slipped his foot upon the uneven rock, which floored the cave. A fortunate stumble, for Hatteraick's second bullet whistled over him with so true and steady an aim that had he been standing upright, it must have lodged in his brain ere the smuggler could draw another pistol. Dinmont closed with him, and endeavoured by main force to pinion down his arm. Such, however, was the wretch's personal strength, joined to the efforts of his despair, that in spite of the gigantic force with which the borderer grappled him, he dragged Dinmont through the blazing flax, and had almost succeeded in drawing a third pistol, which might have proved fatal to the honest farmer, had not Bertram as well as Hazelwood come to his assistance, when by main force and no ordinary exertion of it, they threw Hatteraick on the ground, disarmed him, and bound him. This scuffle, though it takes up some time in the narrative, passed in less than a single minute, when he was fairly mastered. After one or two desperate and almost convulsionary struggles, the ruffian lay perfectly still and silent. "He's gone to die, game ony how," said Dinmont. "Weel, I like him na the war for that." This observation honest Dandy made, while he was shaking the blazing flax from his rough coat and shaggy black hair, some of which had been singed in the scuffle. "He is quiet now," said Bertram. "Stay by him, and do not permit him to stir, till I see whether the poor woman be alive or dead." With Hazelwood's assistance, he raised Meg Merrilies. "I kenned it would be this way," she muttered, "and it's e'en this way that it should be." The ball had penetrated the breast below the throat. It did not bleed much externally, but Bertram, accustomed to see gunshot wounds, thought it the more alarming. "Good God, what shall we do for this poor woman?" said he to Hazelwood, the circumstances superseding the necessity of previous explanation or introduction to each other. "My horse stands tied above in the wood," said Hazelwood. "I have been watching you these 2 hours. I will ride off for some assistance that may be trusted. Meanwhile, you had better defend the mouth of the cavern against every one, till I return." He hastened away. Bertram, after binding Meg Merrilies' wound as well as he could, took station near the mouth of the cave with a cocked pistol in his hand. Dinmont continued to watch Hatteraick, keeping a grasp like that of Hercules on his breast. There was a dead silence in the cavern, only interrupted by the low and suppressed moaning of the wounded female, and by the hard breathing of the prisoner. Chapter Roman 55, For though seduced and led astray thou'st travelled far, and wandered long, thy God hath seen thee all the way, and all the turns that led thee wrong, the whole of justice. After the space of about 3/4 of an hour, which the uncertainty and danger of their situation made seem almost thrice as long, the voice of young Haslewood was heard without. Here I am, he cried with a sufficient party. Come in then, answered Bertram, not a little pleased to find his guard relieved. Haslewood then entered, followed by 2 or 3 countrymen, one of whom acted as a peace officer. They lifted Hatteraick up, and carried him in their arms as far as the entrance of the vault was high enough to permit them, then laid him on his back, and dragged him along as well as they could, for no persuasion would induce him to assist the transportation by any exertion of his own. He lay as silent and inactive in their hands as a dead corpse, incapable of opposing, but in no way aiding their operations, when he was dragged into daylight, and placed erect upon his feet among 3 or 4 assistants who had remained without the cave. He seemed stupefied and dazzled by the sudden change from the darkness of his cavern, while others were superintending the removal of Meg Merrilies. Those who remained with Hatteraick attempted to make him sit down upon a fragment of rock, which lay close upon the high-water mark. A strong shuddering convulsed his iron frame for an instant as he resisted their purpose. Not their Hageliu would not make me sit there. These were the only words he spoke, but their import, and the deep tone of horror in which they were uttered, served to show what was passing in his mind. When Meg Merrilies had also been removed from the cavern, with all the care for her safety that circumstances admitted, they consulted where she should be carried. Haslewood had sent for a surgeon, and proposed that she should be lifted in the meantime to the nearest cottage, but the patient exclaimed with great earnestness, "Na to the Kime o' Dernclute. Kime o' Dernclute's spirit will not free itself o' the flesh, but there. You must indulge her, I believe," said Bertram. "Her troubled imagination will otherwise aggravate the fever of the wound." They bore her accordingly to the vault. On the way her mind seemed to run more upon the scene which had just passed than on her own approaching death. There were 3 of them set upon him. I brought the toison, but Wa was the thirdelt, would be himself returned to work his heir's vengeance. It was evident that the unexpected appearance of Haslewood, whose person the outrage of Hatteraick left her no time to recognize, had produced a strong effect on her imagination. She often recurred to it. Haslewood accounted for his unexpected arrival to Bertram by saying that he had kept them in view for some time by the direction of Mannering, that observing them disappear into the cave he had crept after them, meaning to announce himself and his errand, when his hand in the darkness encountering the leg of Dinmont had nearly produced a catastrophe which indeed nothing but the presence of mind and fortitude of the bold yeoman could have averted. When the gypsy arrived at the hut, she produced the key, and when they entered and were about to deposit her upon the bed, she said in an anxious tone, "None not that way, the feet to the east," and appeared gratified when they reversed her posture accordingly, and placed her in that appropriate to dead body. "Is there no clergyman near," said Bertram, "to assist this unhappy woman's devotions?" A gentleman, the minister of the parish, who had been Charles Haslewood's tutor, had with many others caught the alarm that the murderer of Kennedy was taken on the spot where the deed had been done so many years before, and that a woman was mortally wounded from curiosity, or rather, from the feeling that his duty called him to scenes of distress. This gentleman had come to the Kime of Dernclug, and now presented himself. The surgeon arrived at the same time and was about to probe the wound, but Meg resisted the assistance of either. "It's no what man can do that will heal my body or save my spirit. Let me speak what I have to say, and then ye may work your will isse be nae hindrance but." Whereas Henry Bertram, the assistants to whom this same had been long a stranger, gazed upon each other. "Yes," she said in a stronger and harsher tone. "Said Henry Bertram of Ellangowan, stand from the light, and let me see him." All eyes were turned towards Bertram, who approached the wretched couch. The wounded woman took hold of his hand. "Look at him," she said, "all that ever saw his father or his grandfather, and bear witness if he is not their living image." A murmur went through the crowd. The resemblance was too striking to be denied. "And now here meaned let that man," pointing to Hatteraick, who was seated with his keepers on a sea chest at some distance, "let him deny what I say if he can. That is Henry Bertram's son, to Godfrey Bertram Umquhile of Ellangowan. That young man is the very ladbairn that Dirk Hatteraick carried off from Warrock Wood the day that he murdered the gauger. I was there like a wandering spirit, for longed to see that wood or we left the country. I saved the bairn's life, and sair I prigged, begged and prayed they would leave him wy me, but they bore him away. And he's been lang o'er the sea, and now he's come for his ain. And what should withstand him? I swore to keep the secret, till he was 21 I kenned. He believed to dree his weird, fulfill his destiny till that day. Cam I keep it that oath which I took to them, but I made another vow to mysel, that if I lived to see the day of his return, I would set him in his father's seat. If every step was on a dead man, I have keep it, that oath too. I will be I step mysel, he pointing to Hatteraick, will soon be another, and there will be ane mair yet. The clergyman now interposing remarked it was a pity this deposition was not regularly taken and written down, and the surgeon urged the necessity of examining the wound, previously to exhausting her by questions, when she saw them remove Hatteraick in order to clear the room and leave the surgeon to his operations. She called out aloud, raising herself at the same time upon the couch, Dirk Hatteraick, you and I will never meet again. Until we are before the judgment seat, will ye own to what I have said, or will you dare deny it? He turned his hardened brow upon her, with a look of dumb and inflexible defiance. Dirk Hatteraick, dare ye deny with my blood upon your hands one word of what my dying breath is uttering? He looked at her with the same expression of hardihood and dogged stubbornness, and moved his lips, but uttered no sound. Then, farewell, she said, and God forgive you, your hand has sealed my evidence. When I was in life I was the mad randy gypsy that had been scourged and banished, and branded, that had begged from door to door, and been hounded like a stray tyke dog from parish to parishwa, would hae minded her tale. But now I am a dying woman, and my words will not fall to the ground, any more than the earth will cover my blood. She here paused, and all left the hut except the surgeon and 2 or 3 women. After a very short examination, he shook his head and resigned his post by the dying woman's side to the clergyman. A chaise returning empty to Kippletringan had been stopped on the highroad by a constable who foresaw it would be necessary to convey Hatteraick to jail. The driver, understanding what was going on at Dernclug, left his horses to the care of a blackguard boy, confiding it is to be supposed rather in the years and discretion of the cattle than in those of their keeper, and set off full speed to see, as he expressed himself, whatten a sort o' fun was gone on. He arrived just as the group of tenants and peasants, whose numbers increased every moment, satiated with gazing upon the rugged features of Hatteraick, had turned their attention towards Bertram. Almost all of them, especially the aged men who had seen Ellengowan in his better days, felt and acknowledged the justice of Meg Merrilies' appeal. But the Scotch are a cautious people. They remembered there was another in possession of the estate, and they as yet only expressed their feelings in low whispers to each other. Our friend Jock Jarbos, the postilion, forced his way into the middle of the circle, but no sooner cast his eyes upon Bertram than he started back in amazement with a solemn exclamation, as sure as there's breath in man, it's old Ellengowan arisen from the dead. This public declaration of an unprejudiced witness was just the spark wanted to give fire to the popular feeling, which burst forth in 3 distinct shouts: Bertram forever long life, to the heir of Ellengowan God, send him his ain, and to live among us as his forebears did of yore. I hae been 70 years in the land, said one person. I and mine hae been 70 and 70, to that said another. I have a right to ken the glance of a Bertram. I and mine hae been 300 years here, said another old man, and I sole sell my last cow, but ill see the young laird placed in his right. The women, ever delighted with the marvellous, and not less so when a handsome young man is the subject of the tale, added their shrill acclamations to the general all-hail blessings on him as the very picture o' his father Bertram's, were I the wail o' the countryside. That his pure mother that died in grief and in doubt about him had but lived to see this day, exclaimed some female voices. But well help him to his ain, kimmers, cried others, and before gloss in soul keep the place of Ellengowan well howk him out art why our nails. Others crowded around Dinmont, who was nothing loth to tell what he knew of his friend, and to boast the honour which he had in contributing to the discovery, as he was known to several of the principal farmers, present his testimony, afforded an additional motive to the general enthusiasm. In short, it was one of those moments of intense feeling when the frost of the Scottish people melts like a snow wreath, and the dissolving torrent carries dam and dike before it. The sudden shouts interrupted the devotions of the clergyman, and Meg, who was in one of those dozing fits of stupefaction that precede the close of existence, suddenly started. Dinna ye beardna ye hear has owned I lived, but for this I am a sinful woman, but if my curse brought it down my blessing has ta'en it off, and now I wad hae like to hae said mair, but it canna be staish, continued, stretching her head towards the gleam of light that shot through the narrow slit, which served for a window. Is he not there? Stand out o' the light, and let me look upon him ance mair. But the darkness is in my ain een, she said, sinking back, after an earnest gaze upon vacuities ended now. Pass breath. Come death. And sinking back upon her couch of straw, she expired without a groan. The clergyman and the surgeon carefully noted down all that she had said, now deeply regretting they had not examined her more minutely, but both remaining morally convinced of the truth of her disclosure. Haslewood was the first to compliment Bertram upon the near prospect of his being restored to his name and rank in society. The people around, who now learned from Jabos that Bertram was the person who had wounded him, were struck with his generosity, and added his name to Bertram's in their exulting acclamations. Some, however, demanded of the postillion how he had not recognized Bertram when he saw him some time before at Kippletringan, to which he gave the very natural answer, "Hout, what was I thinking about Ellengowan then? It was the cry that was rising e'en now, that the young laird was found. That put tire on finding out the likeness there was nae missing it. Aunt's ain was set to look for't." The obduracy of Hatteraick during the latter part of this scene was in some slight degree shaken. He was observed to twinkle with his eyelids, to attempt to raise his bound hands for the purpose of pulling his hat over his brow, to look angrily and impatiently to the road, as if anxious for the vehicle which was to remove him from the spot. At length Mr. Haslewood, apprehensive that the popular ferment might take a direction towards the prisoner, directed he should be taken to the post-chaise, and so removed to the town of Kippletringan, to be at Mr. Macmorland's disposal. At the same time, he sent an express to warn that gentleman of what had happened, and now, he said to Bertram, "I should be happy if you would accompany me to Haslewood House, but as that might not be so agreeable just now, as I trust it will be in a day or two, you must allow me to return with you to Woodbourne. But you are on foot, or if the young laird would take my horse, or mine, said half a dozen voices, or mine, he can trot 10 mile an hour without whip or spur, and he's the young laird's fray this moment, if he likes to take him for a hearseld." This hard word is placed in the mouth of one of the aged tenants in the old feudal tenures. The hearseld constituted the best horse or other animal in the vassal's lands, became the right of the superior. The only remnant of this custom is what is called the sassain, or a fee of certain estimated value paid to the sheriff of the county, who gives possession to the vassals of the crown. As they cad it lang syne, Bertram readily accepted the horse as a loan, and poured forth his thanks to the assembled crowd for their good wishes, which they repaid with shouts and vows of attachment. While the happy owner was directing one lad to gie down for the new saddle, another, just to rin the beast o'er wi' a dry wisp o' stree, a third to hie down, and borrow Dan Dunkison's plated stirrups, and expressing his regret that there was nae time to gie the nag a feed, that the young laird might ken his mettle, Bertram, taking the clergyman by the arm, walked into the vault, and shut the door immediately after them. He gazed in silence for some minutes upon the body of Meg Merrilies, as it lay before him, with the features sharpened by death, yet still retaining the stern and energetic character which had maintained in life her superiority as the wild chieftainess of the lawless people amongst whom she was born. The young soldier dried the tears which involuntarily rose on viewing this wreck of one who might be said to have died a victim to her fidelity to his person and family. He then took the clergyman's hand, and asked solemnly if she appeared able to give that attention to his devotions which befitted a departing person. "My dear sir," said the good minister, "I trust this poor woman had remaining sense to feel and join in the import of my prayers, but let us humbly hope we are judged of by our opportunities of religious and moral instruction. In some degree, she might be considered as an uninstructed heathen, even in the bosom of a Christian country, and let us remember that the errors and vices of an ignorant life were balanced by instances of disinterested attachment, amounting almost to heroism. To him who can alone weigh our crimes and errors against our efforts towards virtue, we consign her with awe, but not without hope." "May I request," said Bertram, "that you will see every decent solemnity attended to in behalf of this poor woman. I have some property belonging to her in my hands. At all events, I will be answerable for the expense. You will hear of me at Woodbourne." Dinmont, who had been furnished with a horse by one of his acquaintance, now loudly called out that all was ready for their return, and Bertram and Haslewood, after a strict exhortation to the crowd, which was now increased to several hundreds, to preserve good order in their rejoicing, as the least ungoverned zeal might be turned to the disadvantage of the young laird, as they termed him, took their leave amid the shouts of the multitude. As they rode past the ruined cottages at Dernclug, Dinmont said, "I'm sure when ye come to your ain captain yell, no forget to big build a bit cothouse there deal be in me. But I wad dot mysel and it werena in better hands. I wadna like to live in't though. After what she said odd, I wad put in old Elspeth, the bedrow's beadle's widow, like o them's used wy graves and gayists and things." A short but brisk ride brought them to Woodbourne. The news of their exploit had already flown far and wide, and the whole inhabitants of the vicinity met them on the lawn, with shouts of congratulation. "That you have seen me alive," said Bertram to Lucy, who first ran up to him, though Julia's eyes even anticipated hers. "You must thank these kind friends." With a blush expressing at once pleasure, gratitude, and bashfulness, Lucy curtsied to Hazelwood, but to Dinmont she frankly extended her hand. The honest farmer, in the extravagance of his joy, carried his freedom farther than the hint warranted, for he imprinted his thanks on the lady's lips, and was instantly shocked at the rudeness of his own conduct. "Lord's sake, madam, I ask your pardon," he said. "I forgot, but ye had been a bairn o' my ain captain's sae, hamely he gars ain forget himsel." Old Playdell now advanced. "Nay, if fees like these are going," he said. "Stop, stop, Mr. Playdell," said Julia, "you had your fees beforehand, remember, last night." "Why, I do confess a retainer," said the barrister, "but if I don't deserve double fees from both Miss Bertram and you, when I conclude my examination of Dirk Hatteraick, tomorrow, gad, I will so supple him you shall see, Colonel, and you my saucy missus, though you may not see shall hear." "Aye, that's if we choose to listen, counsellor," replied Julia. "And you think," said Playdell, "it's 2-1 you won't choose, that but you have curiosity that teaches you the use of your ears now and then." "I declare, counsellor," answered the lively damsel, "that such saucy bachelors as you would teach us the use of our fingers now and then." "Reserve them for the harpsichord, my love," said the counsellor. "Better for all parties." While this idle chat ran on, Colonel Mannering introduced to Bertram a plain, good-looking man in a grey coat and waistcoat, buckskin breeches and boots. "This, my dear sir, is Mr. Mac Morland." "To whom," said Bertram, embracing him cordially, "my sister was indebted for a home when deserted by all her natural friends and relations." The Dominie then pressed forward, grinned, chuckled, made a diabolical sound in attempting to whistle, and finally, unable to stifle his emotions, ran away to empty the feelings of his heart at his eyes. We shall not attempt to describe the expansion of heart and glee of this happy evening. How like a hateful ape detected grinning midst his pilfered hoard a cunning man appears, whose secret frauds are opened to the day count. Basil. There was a great movement at Woodbourne early on the following morning to attend the examination at Kippletringan. Mr. Playdell, from the investigation which he had formerly bestowed on the dark affair of Kennedy's death, as well as from the general deference due to his professional abilities, was requested by Mr. Macmorlan and Sir Robert Hazelwood, and another justice of peace who attended to take the situation of chairman and the lead in the examination. Colonel Mannering was invited to sit down with them. The examination, being previous to trial, was private in other respects. The counsellor resumed and re-interrogated former evidence. He then examined the clergyman and surgeon respecting the dying declaration of Meg Merrilies. They stated that she distinctly, positively, and repeatedly declared herself an eye-witness of Kennedy's death by the hands of Hatteraick, and 2 or 3 of his crew, that her presence was accidental, that she believed their resentment at meeting him, when they mere in the act of losing their vessel, through the means of his information led to the commission of the crime, that she said there was one witness of the murder, but who refused to participate in it, still alive, nephew Gabry Farr, and she had hinted at another person, who was an accessory, after not before the fact, but her strength there failed her. They did not forget to mention her declaration that she had saved the child, and that he was torn from her by the smugglers for the purpose of carrying him to Holland. All these particulars were carefully reduced to writing. Dirk Hatteraick was then brought in, heavily ironed, for he had been strictly secured and guarded owing to his former escape. He was asked his name. He made no answer. His profession. He was silent. Several other questions were put, to none of which he returned any reply. Playdell wiped the glasses of his spectacles and considered the prisoner very attentively. "A very truculent-looking fellow," he whispered to Mannering, "but as Dogberry says, ill go cunningly to work with him here. Souls, the shoemaker Souls, do you remember measuring some footsteps imprinted on the mud at the wood of Warrock on November 17? By my orders, Souls remembered the circumstance perfectly. Look at that papyrus, that your note of the measurement, Souls, verified the memorandum. Now, there stands a pair of shoes on that table. Measure them, and see if they correspond with any of the marks you have noted there." The shoemaker obeyed, and declared that they answered exactly to the largest of the footprints. "We shall prove," said the counsellor aside to Mannering, "that these shoes, which were found in the ruins of Dernclug, belonged to Brown, the fellow whom you shot on the lawn at Woodbourne. Now, Souls, measure that prisoner's feet very accurately." Mannering observed Hatteraick strictly, and could notice a visible tremor. Do these measurements correspond with any of the footprints? The man looked at the note, then at his footrule and measurer, then verified his former measurement. By a second they correspond, he said, within a hairbreadth, to a footmark broader and shorter than the former. Hatteraick's genius here deserted him. Daredevil, he broke out. How could there be a footmark on the ground, when it was a frost as hard as the heart of a mammal log? In the evening, I grant you, Captain Hatteraick, said Playdell, but not in the forenoon. Will you favour me with information where you were upon the day you remember so exactly? Hatteraick saw his blunder, and again screwed up his hard features for obstinate silence. Put down his observation, however, said Playdell to the clerk. At this moment the door opened, and much to the surprise of most present, Mr. Gilbert Glossin made his appearance. That worthy gentleman had, by dint of watching and eavesdropping, ascertained that he was not mentioned by name in Meg Merrilies' dying declaration, a circumstance certainly not owing to any favourable disposition towards him, but to the delay of taking her regular examination, and to the rapid approach of death. He therefore supposed himself safe from all evidence, but such as might arise from Hatteraick's confession, to prevent which he resolved to push a bold face, and join his brethren of the bench during his examination. I shall be able, he thought, to make the rascal sensible his safety lies in keeping his own counsel, and mine, and my presence besides, will be a proof of confidence and innocence. If I must lose the estate, I must, but I trust better things. He entered with a profound salutation to Sir Robert Haslewood. Sir Robert, who had rather begun to suspect that his plebeian neighbour had made a catspaw of him, inclined his head, stiffly took snuff, and looked another way. Mr. Corsand, said Glossin to the other yokefellow of justice, your most humble servant. Your humble servant, Mr. Glossin, answered Mr. Corsand, dryly, composing his countenance regis ad exemplar, that is to say, after the fashion of the baronet. Macmorlan, my worthy friend, continued Glossin, how die Dolways on your duty? Umph, said honest Macmorlan, with little respect either to the compliment or salutation, Colonel. Mannering a low bow slightly returned, and Mr. Playdell another low bow. I dared not have hoped for your assistance to poor country gentlemen at this period of the session. Playdell took snuff and eyed him with a glance equally shrewd and sarcastical. Teach him, he said aside to Mannering, the value of the old admonition, no accessoris in concilium antiquam voceris. But perhaps I intrude, gentlemen, said Glossin, who could not fail to observe the coldness of his reception. Is this an open meeting? For my part, said Mr. Playdell, so far from considering your attendance as an intrusion, Mr. Glossin, I was never so pleased in my life to meet with you, especially as I think we should at any rate have had occasion to request the favour of your company in the course of the day. Well then, gentlemen, said Glossin, drawing his chair to the table, and beginning to bustle about among the papers, how far have we got? Where are the declarations? Clerk, give me all these papers, said Mr. Playdell. I have an odd way of arranging my documents, Mr. Glossin. Another person touching them puts me out, but I shall have occasion for your assistance by and by. Glossin, thus reduced to inactivity, stole one glance at Dirk Hatteraick, but could read nothing in his dark scowl save malignity and hatred to all around. But gentlemen, said Glossin, is it right to keep his poor man so heavily ironed when he is taken up merely for examination? This was hoisting a kind of friendly signal to the prisoner. He has escaped once before, said Macmorlan dryly, and Glossin was silenced. Bertram was now introduced, and to Glossin's confusion was greeted in the most friendly manner by all present, even by Sir Robert Haslewood himself. He told his recollections of his infancy with that candour and caution of expression which afforded the best warrant for his good faith. This seems to be rather a civil than a criminal question, said Glossin, rising, and as you cannot be ignorant, gentlemen, of the effect which this young person's pretended parentage may have on my patrimonial interest, I would rather beg leave to retire. No, my good sir, said Mr. Playdell, we can by no means spare you, but why do you call this young man's claims pretended? I don't mean to fish for your defences against them if you have any, but Mr. Playdell, replied Glossin, am always disposed to act above board, and I think I can explain the matter at once. This young fellow, whom I take to be a natural son of the late Ellengowan, has gone about the country for some weeks under different names, caballing with wretched old madwoman who I understand was shot in a late scuffle, and with other tinkers, gypsies, and persons of that description, and a great brute farmer from Liddesdale, stirring up the tenants against their landlords, which as Sir Robert Haslewood of Haslewood knows. "Not to interrupt you, Mr. Glossin," said Playdell, "I ask who you say this young man is." "Why, I say," replied Glossin, "and I believe that gentleman," looking at Hatteraick, "knows that the young man is the natural son of the late Ellengowan, by a girl called Janet Lightohill, who was afterwards married to Hewitt the shipwright that lived in the neighbourhood of Annan. His name is Godfrey Bertram Hewitt, by which name he was entered on board the Royal Caroline excise yacht." I said Playdell, "That is a very likely story, but not to pause upon some difference of eye's complexion. And so forth, please to step forward, sir." "A young seafaring man came forward here," proceeded the counsellor, "is the real Simon Purahers Godfrey Bertram Hewitt, arrived last night from Antigua via Liverpool, mate of a West Indian, and in a fair way of doing well in the world, although he came somewhat irregularly into it." While some conversation passed between the other justices, and this young man Playdell lifted from among the papers on the table Hatteraick's old pocket-book, a peculiar glance of the smuggler's eye induced the shrewd lawyer to think there was something here of interest. He therefore continued the examination of the papers, laying the book on the table, but instantly perceived that the prisoner's interest in the research had cooled. "Must be in the book still, whatever it is," thought Playdell, and again applied himself to the packet-book, until he discovered on a narrow scrutiny a slit between the pasteboard and leather, out of which he drew 3 small slips of paper. Playdell, now turning to Glossin, requested the favour that he would tell them if he had assisted at the search for the body of Kennedy and the child of his patron on the day when they disappeared. "I did not, that is, I did," answered the consciencestruck Glossin. "It is remarkable, though," said the advocate, "that connected as you were with the Ellengowan family, I don't recollect your being examined or even appearing before me while that investigation was proceeding." "I was called to London," answered Glossin, "on most important business the morning after that sad affair." "Clerk," said Playdell, "minute down that reply. I presume the business, Mr. Glossin, was to negotiate these 3 bills drawn by you on Messrs. Van Beest and Van Bruggen, and accepted by one Dirk Hatteraick in their name on the very day of the murder. I congratulate you on their being regularly retired, as I perceive they have been. I think the chances were against it." Glossin's countenance fell. "This piece of real evidence," continued Mr. Playdell, "makes good the account given of your conduct on this occasion by a man called Gabriel Farr, whom we have now in custody, and who witnessed the whole transaction between you and that worthy prisoner. Have you any explanation to give?" "Mr. Playdell," said Glossin with great composure, "presume, if you were my counsel, you would not advise me to answer upon the spur of the moment to a charge which the basest of mankind seem ready to establish by perjury. My advice," said the counsellor, "would be regulated by my opinion of your innocence or guilt in your case. I believe you take the wisest course, but you are aware you must stand committed." "Committed for what, sir?" replied Glossin. "Upon a charge of murder." "No, only as art and part of kidnapping the child." "That is a bailable offence." "Pardon me," said Playdell, "it is plagium, and plagium is felony." "Forgive me, Mr. Playdell, there is only one case upon record, Torrance and Woldy. They were, you remember, resurrection women, who had promised to procure a child's body for some young surgeons, being upon honour to their employers. Rather than disappoint the evening lecture of the students, they stole a live child, murdered it, and sold the body for 3 shillings and 6pence. They were hanged, but for the murder, not for the plagium. This is, in its circumstances, an issue actually a case tried, and reported. Your civil law has carried you a little too far." "Well, sir, but in the meantime Mr. Macmorland must commit you to the county jail, in case this young man repeats the same story. Officers, remove Mr. Glossin and Hatteraick, and guard them in different apartments." Gabriel the gypsy was then introduced, and gave a distinct account of his deserting from Captain Pritchard's vessel, and joining the smugglers in the action, detailed how Dirk Hatteraick set fire to his ship when he found her disabled, and under cover of the smoke escaped with his crew, and as much goods as they could save, into the cavern where they proposed to lie till nightfall. Hatteraick himself, his mate Van Beest Brown, and 3 others, of whom the declarant was one, went into the adjacent woods to communicate with some of their friends in the neighbourhood. They fell in with Kennedy unexpectedly, and Hatteraick, and Brown, aware that he was the occasion of their disasters, resolved to murder him. He stated that he had seen them lay violent hands on the officer and drag him through the woods, but had not partaken in the assault, nor witnessed its termination, that he returned to the cavern by a different route, where he again met Hatteraick and his accomplices, and the captain was in the act of giving an account how he and Brown had pushed a huge crag over as Kennedy lay groaning on the beach, when Glossin suddenly appeared among them. To the whole transaction, by which Hatteraick purchased his secrecy, He was witness respecting young Bertram, he could give a distinct account, till he went to India, after which he had lost sight of him, until he unexpectedly met with him. In Liddesdale, Gabriel Farr further stated that he instantly sent notice to his aunt Meg Merrilies, as well as to Hatteraick, who he knew was then upon the coast, but that he had incurred his aunt's displeasure upon the latter account. He concluded that his aunt had immediately declared that she would do all that lay in her power to help young Ellangowan to his right, even if it should be by informing against Dirk Hatteraick, and that many of her people assisted her besides himself from a belief that she was gifted with supernatural inspirations, with the same purpose he understood his aunt had given to Bertram the treasure of the tribe of which she had the custody 3 or 4 gypsies, by the express command of Meg Merrilies, mingled in the crowd when the custom house was attacked for the purpose of liberating Bertram, which he had himself effected. He said that in obeying Meg's dictates, they did not pretend to estimate their propriety or rationality, the respect in which she was held by her tribe, precluding all such subjects of speculation upon further interrogation. The witness added that his aunt had always said that Harry Bertram carried that round his neck, which would ascertain his birth. It was a spell, she said, that an Oxford scholar had made for him, and she possessed the smugglers with an opinion that to deprive him of it would occasion the loss of the vessel. Bertram here produced a small velvet bag, which he said he had worn round his neck from his earliest infancy, and which he had preserved first from superstitious reverence, and latterly from the hope that it might serve one day to aid in the discovery of his birth. The bag being opened was found to contain a blue silk case front, which was drawn a scheme of nativity. Upon inspecting this paper, Colonel Mannering instantly admitted it was his own composition, and afforded the strongest and most satisfactory evidence that the possessor of it must necessarily be the young heir of Ellangowan, by avowing his having first appeared in that country in the character of an astrologer. And now said Pleydell make out warrants of commitment for Hatteraick and Glossin, until liberated in due course of law. Yet he said, I am sorry for Glossin. Now I think, said Mannering, he's incomparably the least deserving of pity of the two, the other's a bold fellow, though as hard as flint. Very natural, Colonel, said the advocate, that you should be interested in the ruffian, and I in the Navathats, all professional taste, but I can tell you Glossin would have been a pretty lawyer, had he not had such a turn for the roguish part of the profession. Scandal would say, observed Mannering, he might not be the worse lawyer for that. Scandal would tell a lie, then replied Pleydell, as she usually does laws like laudanum, it's much more easy to use it, as a quack does, than to learn to apply it like a physician. Chapter Roman 57, unfit to live or die, O marble heart. After him fellows drag him to the block. Measure for measure. The jail at the county town of the Shire off was one of those old-fashioned dungeons which disgraced Scotland, until of late years, when the prisoners and their guard arrived there. Hatteraick, whose violence and strength were well known, was secured in what was called the condemned ward. This was a large apartment near the top of the prison, a round bar of iron about the thickness of a man's arm above. The elbow crossed the apartment horizontally at the height of about 6 inches from the floor, and its extremities were strongly built into the wall at either end. Hatteraick's ankles were secured within shackles, which were connected by a chain at the distance of about 4 feet, with a large iron ring which travelled upon the bar. We have described thus a prisoner might shuffle along the length of the bar from one side of the room to another, but could not retreat farther from it in any other direction than the brief length of the chain. Admitted this mode of securing prisoners was universally practised in Scotland after condemnation. When a man received sentence of death, he was put upon the gad, as it was called, that is secured to the bar of iron in the manner mentioned in the text. The practice subsisted in Edinburgh till the old jail was taken down some years since, and perhaps may be still in use. When his feet had been thus secured, the keeper removed his handcuffs, and left his person at liberty in other respects. A pallet bed was placed close to the bar of iron, so that the shackled prisoner might lie down at pleasure, still fastened to the iron bar in the manner described. Hatteraick had not been long in this place of confinement before Glossin arrived at the same prison house. In respect to his comparative rank and education, he was not ironed, but placed in a decent apartment under the inspection of Mac Guffog, who since the destruction of the Bridewell of Portonferry by the mob had acted here as an under-turnkey when Glossin was enclosed within this room, and had solitude and leisure to calculate all the chances against him, and in his favour. He could not prevail upon himself to consider the game as desperate. The estate is lost, he said, that must go, and between Pleydell and Macmorland Thale, cut down my claim on it, to a trifle my character, but if I get off with life and liberty, I'll win money yet, and varnish that over again. I knew not the gauger's job, until the rascal had done the deed. And though I had some advantage by the contraband, that is no felony, but the kidnapping of the boy they touch me closer, let me see this Bertram was a child at the time, his evidence must be imperfect, other fellow is a deserter, a gypsy, and an outlaw. Meg Merrilies DN, her is dead. These infernal bills Hatteraick brought them with him, I suppose to have the means of threatening me or extorting money from me. I must endeavour to see the rascal, must get him to stand steady, must persuade him to put some other colour upon the business. His mind teeming with schemes of future deceit to cover former villainy, he spent the time in arranging and combining them, until the hour of supper. Mac Guffog attended as turnkey on this occasion. He was, as we know, the old and special acquaintance of the prisoner, who was now under his charge. After giving the turnkey a glass of brandy and sounding him with one or two cajoling speeches, Glossin made it his request that he would help him to an interview with Dirk Hatteraick. Impossible, utterly impossible, it's contrary to the express orders of Mr. Macmorlan, and the captain, as the head jailer of a county jail is called in Scotland, would never forgy me. But why should he know of it, said Glossin, slipping a couple of guineas into Mac Guffog's hand. The turnkey weighed the gold and looked sharp at Glossin. Aye, Mr. Glossin, ye ken the ways o' this place. Look ye at lock up our ill return, and bring ye upstairs to him, but ye must stay a night in his cell, for I am under necessity to carry the keys to the captain for the night, and I cannot let you out again until morning. Then I'll visit the wards half an hour earlier than usual, and ye may get out and be snug in your ain berth when the captain gangs his rounds. When the hour of 10 had pealed from the neighbouring steeple, Mac Guffog came prepared with a small dark lantern. He said softly to Glossin, slip your shoes off and follow me. When Glossin was out of the door, Mac Guffog, as if in the execution of his ordinary duty, and speaking to a prisoner within, called a loud good night to you, sir, and locked the door, clattering the bolts with much ostentatious noise. He then guided Glossin up a steep and narrow stair, at the top of which was the door of the condemned ward. He unbarred and unlocked it, and giving Glossin the lantern, made a sign to him to enter, and locked the door behind him with the same affected accuracy. In the large dark cell into which he was thus introduced, Glossin's feeble light, for some time, enabled him to discover nothing. At length, he could dimly distinguish the pallet bed stretched on the floor beside the great iron bar which traversed the room, and on that pallet reposed the figure of a man. Glossin approached him. Dirk Hatteraick. Donner and Hagel, it is his voice, said the prisoner, sitting up and clashing his fetters as he rose. Then my dream is true begone, and leave me to myself, it will be your best. What, my good friend, said Glossin, will you allow the prospect of a few weeks' confinement to depress your spirit? Yes, answered the ruffian sullenly, when I am only to be released by a halter. Let me go about your business, and turn the lamp from my face. Pshaw, my dear Dirk, don't be afraid, said Glossin, I have a glorious plan to make all right. To the bottomless pit with your plans, replied his accomplice. You have planned me out of ship, cargo, and life, and I dreamt this moment that Meg Merrilies dragged you here by the hair, and gave me the long-clasped knife she used to weary you. Don't know what she said, sturm, whether it will be your wisdom not to tempt me. But Hatteraick, my good friend, do but rise and speak to me, said Glossin. I will not, answered the savage doggedly. You have caused all the mischief. You would not let Meg keep the boy. She would have returned him after he had forgot all. Why, Hatteraick, you are turned driveller. Whether will you deny that all that cursed attempt at portanfery, which lost both sloop and crew, was your device for your own job? But the goods, you know. Curse the goods, said the smuggler. We could have got plenty more, but daredevil to lose the ship, and the fine follows, and my own life for a cursed coward villain, that always works his own mischief with other people's hands. Speak to me no more, dangerous. But Dirk, but Hatteraick, hear me only a few words. Hagel neen. Only one sentence. Toss and curses neen. At least get up for an obstinate Dutch brute, said Glossin, losing his temper and pushing Hatteraick with his foot. Donner and Blitzen, said Hatteraick, springing up and grappling with him. You will have it then. Glossin struggled and resisted, but owing to his surprise at the fury of the assault so ineffectually, that he fell under Hatteraick, the back part of his neck coming full upon the iron bar with stunning violence. The death grapple continued. The room immediately below the condemned ward, being that of Glossin, was of course empty, but the inmates of the second apartment beneath felt the shock of Glossin's heavy fall, and heard a noise as of struggling and of groans, but all sounds of horror were too congenial to this place to excite much curiosity or interest. In the morning, faithful to his promise, Mac Guffog came Mr. Glossin said be in a whispering voice. Cole louder, answered Dirk Hatteraick. Mr. Glossin, for God's sake come away. He'll hardly do that without help, said Hatteraick. What are you chattering there for? Mac Guffog called out the captain from below. Come away for God's sake, Mr. Glossin, repeated the turnkey. At this moment, the jailer made his appearance with a light grate, was his surprise, and even horror, to observe Glossin's body, lying doubled across the iron bar, in a posture that excluded all idea of his being alive. Hatteraick was quietly stretched upon his pallet, within a yard of his victim. On lifting Glossin, it was found he had been dead for some hours. His body bore uncommon marks of violence. The spine, where it joins the skull, had received severe injury by his first fall. There were distinct marks of strangulation about the throat, which corresponded with the blackened state of his face. The head was turned backward over the shoulder, as if the neck had been wrung round with desperate violence, so that it would seem that his inveterate antagonist had fixed a fatal gripe upon the wretch's throat, and never quitted it while life lasted. The lantern, crushed and broken to pieces, lay beneath the body. Mac Morlan was in the town, and came instantly to examine the corpse. What brought Glossin here? he said to Hatteraick. The devil, answered the ruffian. And what did you do to him? Sent him to hell before me, replied the miscreant. Wretch, said Mac Morlan, you have crowned a life spent without a single virtue, with the murder of your own miserable accomplice. Virtue, exclaimed the prisoner Donner. I was always faithful to my shippers, always accounted for cargo to the last stiver. Hark, ye let me have pen and ink, and ill write an account of the whole to our house, and leave me alone a couple of hours. Will ye'nd let them take away that piece of carrion? Donner wetter. Mac Morlan deemed it the best way to humour the savage. He was furnished with writing materials, and left alone when they again opened the door. It was found that this determined villain had anticipated justice. He had adjusted a cord taken from the trucklebed, and attached it to a bone, the relic of his yesterday's dinner, which he had contrived to drive into a crevice between two stones in the wall at a height as great as he could reach. Standing upon the bar, having fastened the noose, he had the resolution to drop his body as if to fall on his knees, and to retain that posture until resolution was no longer necessary. The letter he had written to his owners, though chiefly upon the business of their trade, contained many allusions to the Junker of Ellengowan, as he called him, and afforded absolute confirmation of all Meg Merrilies and her nephew had told. To dismiss the catastrophe of these two wretched men, I shall only add that Mac Guffog was turned out of office, notwithstanding his declaration, which he offered to attest by oath, that he had locked Glossin safely in his own room upon the night preceding his being found dead in Dirk Hatteraick's. His story, however, found faith with the worthy Mr. Scray and other lovers of the marvellous, who still hold that the enemy of mankind brought these two wretches together upon that night, by supernatural interference, that they might fill up the cup of their guilt, and receive its meed by murder and suicide. Chapter Roman 58, to sum the wholeth close of all. Dean Swift. As Glossin died without heirs, and without payment of the price, the estate of Ellengowan was again thrown upon the hands of Mr. Godfrey Bertram's creditors, the right of most of whom was however defensible in case Henry Bertram should establish his character of heir of entail. This young gentleman put his affairs into the hands of Mr. Playdell and Mr. Mac Morlan, with one single proviso, that though he himself should be obliged again to go to India, every debt justly and honourably due by his father should be made good to the claimant. Mannering, who heard this declaration, grasped him kindly by the hand, and from that moment might be dated a thorough understanding between them. The hoards of Miss Margaret Bertram and the liberal assistance of the Colonel easily enabled the heir to make provision for payment of the just creditors of his father, while the ingenuity and research of his law friends detected, especially in the accounts of Glossin, so many overcharges as greatly diminished the total amount. In these circumstances, the creditors did not hesitate to recognize Bertram's right, and to surrender to him the house and property of his ancestors. All the party repaired from Woodbourne to take possession amid the shouts of the tenantry and the neighbourhood, and so eager was Colonel Mannering to superintend certain improvements which he had recommended to Bertram, that he removed with his family from Woodbourne to Ellengowan, although at present containing much less and much inferior accommodation. The poor Dominie's brain was almost turned with joy on returning to his old habitation. He posted upstairs, taking 3 steps at once to a little shabby attic, his cell and dormitory in former days, and which the possession of his much superior apartment at Woodbourne had never banished from his memory. Here, One sad thought suddenly struck the honest man: the books, no 3 rooms in Ellengowan, were capable to contain them. While this qualifying reflection was passing through his mind, he was suddenly summoned by Mannering to assist in calculating some proportions relating to a large and splendid house, which was to be built on the site of the new place of Ellengowan, in a style corresponding to the magnificence of the ruins, in its vicinity among the various rooms in the plan. The Dominie observed that one of the largest vasts, entitled the library, and close beside was a snug, well-proportioned chamber, entitled Mr. Sampson's apartment. Prodigious, 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 shouted the enraptured Dominie. Mr. Playdell had left the party for some time, but he returned according to promise during the Christmas recess of the courts. He drove up to Ellengowan when all the family were abroad, but the colonel, who was busy with plans of buildings and pleasure-grounds in which he was well skilled, and took great delight. "Aha," said the counsellor, "so here you are. Where are the ladies? Where is the fair Julia?" "Walking out with young Heywood Bertram and Captain de Lazara, a friend of his who is with us just now. They are gone to plan out a cottage at Dernclug. Well, have you carried through your law business?" "With a wet finger," answered the lawyer. "Got our youngster's special service retoured into Chancery. We had him served ere before the macers." "Macers, who are they?" "Why, it is a kind of judicial saturnalia. You must know that one of the requisites to be a macer or officer in attendance upon our Supreme Court is that they shall be men of no knowledge." "Very well. Now our Scottish legislature, for the joke's sake I suppose, have constituted those men of no knowledge into a peculiar court for trying questions of relationship and descent, such as this business of Bertram, which often involve the most nice and complicated questions of evidence." "The devil they have, I should think that rather inconvenient," said Mannering. "Oh, we have a practical remedy for the theoretical absurdity. 1 or 2 of the judges act upon such occasions as prompters and assessors to their own doorkeepers. But you know what Cujacius says: multa sunt in moribus dissentania, multa sine ration. The singular inconsistency hinted at is now in a great degree removed. However, this Saturnalian court has done our business, and a glorious batch of claret we had afterwards at Walker's Macmorlan will stare when he sees the bill." "Never fear," said the colonel, "well face the shock, and entertain the county at my friend Mrs. Mac Candlish's to boot." "And choose Jock Jabos for your master of horse," replied the lawyer. "Perhaps I may." "And where is Dandy, the redoubted lord of Liddesdale?" demanded the advocate. "Returned to his mountains, but he has promised Julia to make a descent in summer with the good wife, as he calls her, and I don't know how many children. Oh, the curly-headed varlets, I must come to play at Blind Harry and High Spy with them. But what is all this?" added Playdell, taking up the plant-stower in the centre, "to be an imitation of the Eagle Tower at Caernarvon Corpse de Logis Devilwing Swings. Why, the house will take the estate of Ellengowan on its back and fly away with it." "Why, then we must ballast it with a few bags of sicker rupees," replied the colonel. "Aha, sits the wind there. Then I suppose the young dog carries off my mistress Julia." "Even so, counsellor. These rascals, the postnati, get the better of us of the old school at every turn," said Mr. Playdell, "but she must convey and make over her interest in me to Lucy." "To tell you the truth, I am afraid your flank will be turned there too," replied the colonel. "Indeed. Here has been Sir Robert Haslewood," said Mannering upon a visit to Bertram, thinking and deeming and opining. "O Lord, I pray spare me the worthy baronet's triads." "Well, sir," continued Mannering, to make short, he conceived that as the property of Singleside lay like a wedge between 2 farms of his, and was 4 or 5 miles separated from Ellengowan, something like a sale or exchange or arrangement might take place to the mutual convenience of both parties. "Well, and Bertram?" Why, Bertram replied that he considered the original settlement of Mrs. Margaret Bertram as the arrangement most proper in the circumstances of the family, and that therefore the estate of Singleside was the property of his sister. "The rascal," said Playdell, wiping his spectacles, "hell steal my heart as well as my mistress et puis." And then Sir Robert retired after many gracious speeches, but last week he again took the field in force with his coach, and 6 horses, his laced scarlet waistcoat, and best bobwiggle, very grand as the good boy books say. Ay, and what was his overture? Why, he talked with great form of an attachment, on the part of Charles Haslewood, to Miss Bertram. Ay, he respected the little guard Cupid, when he saw him perched on the dun of Singleside, and his poor Lucy to keep house with that old fool and his wife, who is just the knight himself in petticoats. No parried that Singeside House is to be repaired for the young people, and to be called hereafter Mount Hazelwood. And do yourself, Colonel, propose to continue at Woodbourne? Only till we carry these plans into effect. See, here's the plan of my bungalow, with all convenience for being separate and sulky when I please. And being situated, as I see, next door to the old castle, you may repair Donegild's tower for the nocturnal contemplation of the celestial bodies. Bravo, Colonel. No, no, my dear counsellor, here ends the astrologer. Notes. Note 1 Mumps High. It is fitting to explain to the reader the locality described in this chapter. There is, or rather I should say, there was a little inn called Mumps Hall, that is being interpreted Beggar's Hotel near to Gilsland, which had not then attained its present fame as a spa. It was a hedge alehouse, where the bolder farmers of either country often stopped to refresh themselves, and their nags in their way to and from the fairs and trysts in Cumberland, and especially those who came from or went to Scotland through a barren and lonely district, without either road or pathway, emphatically called the waste of Bewcastle at the period when the adventures described in the novel are supposed to have taken place. There were many instances of attacks by freebooters on those who travelled through this wild district, and Mumps Ha had a bad reputation for harbouring the banditti who committed such depredations. An old and sturdy yeoman belonging to the Scottish side by surname an Armstrong or Elliot, but known by his sobriquet of Fighting Charlie of Liddesdale, and still remembered for the courage he displayed in the frequent frays, which took place on the border 50 or 60 years since, had the following adventure in the waste, which suggested the idea of the scene in the text. Charlie had been at Stagshabank Fair, had sold his sheep or cattle, or whatever he had brought to market, and was on his return to Liddesdale. There were then no country banks where cash could be deposited, and bills received instead, which greatly encouraged robbery in that wild country, as the objects of plunder were usually fraught with gold. The robbers had spies in the fair, by means of whom they generally knew whose purse was best stocked, and who took a lonely and desolate road homeward, those, in short, who were best worth robbing, and likely to be most easily robbed. All this Charlie knew full well, but he had a pair of excellent pistols, and a dauntless heart. He stopped at Mumps Ha, notwithstanding the evil character of the place. His horse was accommodated, where it might have the necessary rest and feed of corn, and Charlie himself, a dashing fellow, grew gracious with the landlady, a buxom queen, who used all the influence in her power to induce him to stop all night. The landlord was from home, she said, and it was ill passing the waste, as twilight must needs descend on him before he gained the Scottish side, which was reckoned the safest. But Fighting Charlie, though he suffered himself to be detained later than was prudent, did not account Mumps Ha a safe place to quarter in during the night. He tore himself away therefore from Meg's good fare and kind words, and mounted his nag, having first examined his pistols, and tried by the ramrod whether the charge remained in them. He proceeded a mile or two at a round trot, when as the waste stretched black before him, apprehensions began to awaken in his mind, partly arising out of Meg's unusual kindness, which he could not help thinking had rather a suspicious appearance. He therefore resolved to reload his pistols, lest the powder had become damp. But what was his surprise when he drew the charge to find neither powder nor ball, while each barrel had been carefully filled with bore up to the space which the loading had occupied, and the priming of the weapons being left untouched. Nothing but actually drawing and examining the charge could have discovered the inefficiency of his arms, till the fatal minute arrived when their services were required. Charlie bestowed a hearty Liddesdale curse on his landlady and reloaded his pistols, with care and accuracy, having now no doubt that he was to be waylaid and assaulted. He was not far engaged in the waste, which was then and is now traversed only by such routes as are described in the text, when 2 or 3 fellows disguised and variously armed started from a moss hag, while by a glance behind him for marching, as the Spaniard says, with his beard on his shoulder, he reconnoitred in every direction. Charlie instantly saw retreat was impossible, as other 2 stout men appeared behind him at some distance. The borderer lost not a moment in taking his resolution, and boldly trotted against his enemies in front, who called loudly on him to stand and deliver. Charlie spurred on and presented his pistol. "Dn your pistol," cried the foremost robber, whom Charlie to his dying day protested he believed to have been the landlord of Mumps Ha. "Dn your pistol, care, not a curse for it, I lad," said the deep voice of Fighting Charlie. But the toes out now, he had no occasion to utter another word. The rogues, surprised at finding a man of redoubted courage well armed, instead of being defenceless, took to the moss in every direction, and he passed on his way without further molestation. The author has heard this story told by persons who received it from Fighting Charlie himself, He has also heard that Mumpsha was afterwards the scene of some other atrocious villainy, for which the people of the house suffered, but these are all tales of at least half a century old, and the waste has been for many years as safe as any place in the kingdom. Note Roman 2 Dandy Dinmont. The author may here remark that the character of Dandy Dinmont was drawn from no individual, a dozen at least of stout Liddesdale yeomen with whom he has been acquainted, and whose hospitality he has shared in his rambles through that wild country at a time when it was totally inaccessible save in the manner described in the text might lay claim to be the prototype of the rough but faithful, hospitable and generous farmer, but one circumstance occasioned the name to be fixed upon a most respectable individual of this class, now no more Mr. James Davidson of Hindley, a tenant of Lord Douglas, besides the points of blunt honesty, personal strength, and hardihood, designed to he expressed in the character of Dandy Dinmont, had the humour of naming a celebrated race of terriers, which he possessed by the generic names of Mustard and Pepper according, as their colour was yellow or greyish-black, without any other individual distinction, except as according to the nomenclature in the text Mr. Davidson resided at Hindley, a wild farm on the very edge of the Teviotdale Mountains and bordering Close and Liddesdale, where the rivers and brooks divide as they take their course to the eastern and western, sees his passion for the chase in all its forms, but especially for fox hunting, as followed in the fashion described in the next chapter, in conducting which he was skilful beyond most men in the South Highlands, was the distinguishing point in his character. When the tale on which these comments are written became rather popular, the name of Dandy Dinmont was generally given to him, which Mr. Davidson received with great good humour, only saying, while he distinguished the author by the name applied to him in the country where his own is so common, that the sheriff had not written about him mair than about other folk, but only about his dogs, an English lady of high rank and fashion being desirous to possess a brace of the celebrated Mustard and Pepper terriers, expressed her wishes in a letter, which was literally addressed to Dandy Dinmont, under which very general direction it reached Mr. Davidson, who was justly proud of the application, and failed not to comply with a request which did him and his favourite attendants so much honour. I trust I shall not be considered as offending the memory of a kind and worthy man, if I mention a little trait of character, which occurred in Mr. Davidson's last illness. I use the words of the excellent clergyman who attended him, who gave the account to a reverend gentleman of the same persuasion. I read to Mr. Davidson the very suitable and interesting truths you addressed to him. He listened to them with great seriousness, and has uniformly displayed a deep concern about his soul's salvation. He died on the first Sabbath of the year 1820. An apoplectic stroke deprived him in an instant of all sensation, but happily his brother was at his bedside, for he had detained him from the meeting-house that day to be near him, although he felt himself not much worse than usual. So you have got the last little mustard that the hand of Dandy Dinmont bestowed. His ruling passion was strong even on the eve of death. Mr. Bailey's foxbounds had started a fox opposite to his window a few weeks ago, and as soon as he heard the sound of the dogs his eyes glistened. He insisted on getting out of bed, and with much difficulty got to the window and there enjoyed the fun, as he called it. When I came down to ask for him, he said he had seen Reynard but had not seen his death. If it had been the will of Providence, he added, I would have liked to have been after him, but I am glad that I got to the window, and am thankful for what I saw, for it has done me a great deal of good notwithstanding these eccentricities. Adds the sensible and liberal clergyman, I sincerely hope and believe he has gone to a better world and better company and enjoyments. If some part of this little narrative may excite a smile, it is one which is consistent with the most perfect respect for the simple-minded invalid, and his kind and judicious religious instructor, who we hope will not be displeased with our giving, we trust, a correct edition of an anecdote which has been pretty generally circulated. The race of Pepper and Mustard are in the highest estimation at this day, not only for vermin killing, but for intelligence and fidelity. Those who, like the author, possess a brace of them consider them as very desirable companions. Note Roman 3 Lum cleeks. The cleek here intimated is the iron book or hooks, depending from the chimney of a Scottish cottage, on which the pot is suspended. When boiling, the same appendage is often called the crook. The salmon is usually dried by hanging it up, after being split, and rubbed with salt in the smoke of the turf fire above the cleeks, where it is said to rise. That preparation being so termed, the salmon thus preserved is eaten as a delicacy under the name of kipper, a luxury to which Dr. Regil has given his sanction as an ingredient of the Scottish breakfast. See the excellent novel entitled Note Roman 4 clan surnames. The distinction of individuals by nicknames when they possess no property is still common on the border, and indeed necessary, from the number of persons having the same name in the small village of Lustrother in Roxburghshire. There dwelt in the memory of man 4 inhabitants called Andrew or Dandy. Oliver they were distinguished as Dandy Easelgate, Dandy Wasselgate, Dandy Thumby, and Dandy Dumby. The 2 first had their names from living eastward and westward in the street of the village, the third for something peculiar in the conformation of his thumb, the 4th from his taciturn habits. It is told as a well-known jest that a beggar woman repulsed from door to door, as she solicited quarters through a village of Annandale, asked in her despair if there were no Christians in the place, to which the hearers, concluding that she inquired for some persons so surnamed, answered, "Na, there are nae Christians here, we are a Johnston and Jardines." Note Roman 5 Gypsy superstitions. The mysterious rites in which Meg Merrilies is described as engaging belong to her character. As a queen of her race, all know that gypsies in every country claim acquaintance with the gift of fortune-telling, but as is often the case, they are liable to the superstitions of which they avail themselves. In others, the correspondent of Blackwood, quoted in the introduction to this tale, gives us some information on the subject of their credulity. "I have ever understood," he says, speaking of the Yethome gypsies, "that they are extremely superstitious, carefully noticing the formation of the clouds, the flight of particular birds, and the sowing of the winds. Before attempting any enterprise, they have been known for several successive days to turn back with their loaded carts asses and children on meeting with persons whom they considered of unlucky aspect, nor do they ever proceed on their summer peregrinations without some propitious omen of their fortunate return. They also burn the clothes of their dead, not so much from any apprehension of infection being communicated by them, as the conviction that the very circumstance of wearing them would shorten the days of their living. They likewise carefully watch the corpse by night and day, till the time of interment, and conceive that the deal tinkles at the lycuache of those who felt in their dead throe the agonies and terrors of remorse. These notions are not peculiar to the gypsies, but having been once generally entertained among the Scottish common people, are now only found among those who are the most rude in their habits, and most devoid of instruction. The popular idea that the protracted struggle between life and death is painfully prolonged by keeping the door of the apartment shut was received as certain by the superstitious eld of Scotland, but neither was it to be thrown wide open to leave the door ajar was the plan adopted by the old crones, who understood the mysteries of deathbeds and lycuaches. In that case, there was room for the imprisoned spirit to escape, and yet an obstacle, we have been assured, was offered to the entrance of any frightful form which might otherwise intrude itself. The threshold of a habitation was in some sort a sacred limit, and the subject of much superstition, a bride, even to this day, is always lifted over it, a rule derived apparently from the Romans. Note Roman 6 Tappet hen. The tappet hen contained 3 quarts of claret. Wheel she load a howick gill, and loog to see a tappet hen. I have seen one of these formidable stoups at Provost Haswell's at Jedburgh in the days of yore. It was a pewter measure, the claret being in ancient days served from the tap, and had the figure of a hen upon the Roman 549. In later times, the name was given to a glass bottle of the same dimensions. These are rare apparitions among the degenerate topers of modern days. Note Roman 7 Convivial habits of the Scottish bar. The account given by Mr. Playdell of his sitting down in the midst of a revel to draw an appeal case was taken from a story told me by an aged gentleman of the elder President Dundas, of Arniston, father of the younger President, and of Lord Melville. It had been thought very desirable while that distinguished lawyer was King's counsel that his assistance should be obtained in drawing an appeal case, which, as occasion for such writings then rarely occurred, was held to be matter of great nicety. The solicitor employed for the appellant, attended by my informant acting as his clerk, went to the Lord Advocate's chambers in the Fishmarket Close. As I think it was Saturday at noon, the court was just dismissed. The Lord Advocate had changed his dress and booted himself, and his servant and horses were at the foot of the close. To carry him to Arniston it was scarcely possible to get him to listen to a word respecting business. The wily agent, however, on pretence of asking 1 or 2 questions, which would not detain him half an hour, drew his lordship, who was no less an eminent bon vivant than a lawyer of unequalled talent, to take a wet at a celebrated tavern. When the learned counsel became gradually involved in a spirited discussion of the law points of the case, at length it occurred to him that he might as well ride to Arniston in the cool of the evening. The horses were directed to he put in the stable, but not to be unsaddled. Dinner was ordered, the law was laid aside for a time, and the bottle circulated very freely at 9 o'clock at night. After he had been honouring Bacchus for so many hours, the Lord Advocate ordered his horses to be unsaddled. Paper, pen and ink were brought, began to dictate the appeal case, and continued at his task till 4 o'clock the next morning. By next day's post the solicitor sent the case to London, a chef-d'oeuvre of its kind, and in which my informant assured me it was not necessary on revisal to correct 5 words. I am not therefore conscious of having overstepped accuracy in describing the manner in which Scottish lawyers of the old time occasionally united the worship of Bacchus with that of Themis. My informant was Alexander Keith's grandfather to my friend, the present Sir Alexander Keith of Ravelstone, and apprentice at the time to the writer who conducted the cause. Note Roman 8 Lord Monboddo. The Burnet, whose taste for the evening meal of the ancients is quoted by Mr. Pleydell, was the celebrated metaphysician and excellent man Lord Monboddo, whose coenie will not be soon forgotten by those who have shared his classic hospitality as a Scottish judge. He took the designation of his family estate. His philosophy, as is well known, was of a fanciful and somewhat fantastic character, but his learning was deep, and he was possessed of a singular power of eloquence, which reminded the hearer of the ars rotundum of the Grove or Academe. Enthusiastically partial to classical habits, his entertainments were always given in the evening, when there was a circulation of excellent Bordeaux in flasks, garlanded with roses, which were also strewed on the table after the manner of Horace. The best society, whether in respect of rank or literary distinction, was always to be found in St. John's Street, Canongate. The conversation of the excellent old man, his high gentleman-like chivalrous spirit, the learning and wit with which he defended his fanciful paradoxes, the kind and liberal spirit of his hospitality, must render these nocts coenique dear to all who, like the author, though then young, had the honour of sitting at his board. Note Roman 9 Lawyers' sleepless nights. It is probably true, as observed by Counsellor Pleydell, that a lawyer's anxiety about his case, supposing him to have been some time in practice, will seldom disturb his rest or digestion. Clients will, however, sometimes fondly entertain a different opinion. I was told by an excellent judge, now no more, of a country gentleman who, addressing his leading counsel, my informer, then an advocate in great practice, on the morning of the day on which the case was to be pleaded, said with singular bonhomie, "Weel, my lord, the counsel was Lord Advocate, the awful day is come at last. I have nae been able to sleep a wink, for thinking of itner, I dare say your lordship either." Additional note: Galwegian localities and personages, which have been supposed to be alluded to in the novel. An old English proverb says that more know torn fool than Tom Fool knows, and the influence of the adage seems to extend to works composed under the influence of an idle or foolish planet. Many corresponding circumstances are detected by readers of which the author did not suspect the existence. He must, however, regard it as a great compliment that in detailing incidents purely imaginary, he has been so fortunate in approximating reality as to remind his readers of actual occurrences. It is therefore with pleasure he notices some pieces of local history and tradition which have been supposed to coincide with the fictitious persons, incidents, and scenery of Guy Mannering. The prototype of Dirk Hatteraick is considered as having been a Dutch skipper called Jockins. This man was well known on the coast of Galloway and Dumfriesshire as sole proprietor and master of a buckcar or smuggling lugger, called the Black Prince, being distinguished by his nautical skill and intrepidity. His vessel was frequently freighted, and his own services employed by French, Dutch Manx, and Scottish smuggling companies. A person well known by the name of Buckcartier, from having been a noted smuggler of that article, and also by that of Boglebush, the place of his residence, assured my kind informant Mr. Train that he had frequently seen upwards of 200 Lingto-men assemble at one time, and go off into the interior of the country fully laden with contraband goods. In those halcyon days of the free trade, the fixed price for carrying a box of tea or bale of tobacco from the coast of Galloway to Edinburgh was 15 shillings, and a man with horses carried 4 such packages. The trade was entirely destroyed by Mr. Pitt's celebrated commutation law, which, by reducing the duties upon excisable articles, enabled lawful dealer to compete with the smuggler. The statute was called in Galloway and Dumfriesshire, by those who had thriven upon the contraband trade, the Burning and Starving Act. Sure of such active assistance on shore, Jockins demeaned himself so boldly that his mere name was a terror to the officers of the revenue. He availed himself of the fears which presence inspired on one particular night, when happening to be ashore with a considerable quantity of goods in his sole custody. A strong party of excisemen came down on him, far from shunning the attack. Yawkins sprung forward shouting, "Come on, my lads, Yawkins is before you." The revenue officers were intimidated, and relinquished their prize, though defended only by the courage and address of a single man on his proper element. Yawkins was equally successful. One occasion, he was landing his cargo at the Manxman's Lake near Kirkcudbright, when two revenue cutters, the Pygmy and the Dwarf, hove in sight at once on different tacks, the coming round by the Isles of Fleet, the other between the Point of Rubery and the Muckle Ran. The dauntless free trader instantly weighed anchor, and bore down right between the luggers so close that he tossed his hat on the deck of the one, and his wig on that of the other, hoisted a cask to his maintop, to show his occupation, and bore away under an extraordinary pressure of canvas without receiving injury. To account for these and other hairbreadth escapes, popular superstition alleged that Yawkins insured his celebrated buckcar by compounding with the devil for 1/10 of his crew every voyage. How they arranged the separation of the stark and tithes is left to our conjecture. The buckcar was perhaps called the Black Prince, in honour of the formidable insurer. The Black Prince used to discharge her cargo at Loose Balcarry and elsewhere on the coast, but her owner's favourite landing places were at the entrance to the Dee and the Cree near the old castle of Rubery, about 6 miles below Kirkcudbright. There is a cave of large dimensions in the vicinity of Rubery, which, from its being frequently used by Yawkins and his supposed connection with the smugglers on the shore, is now called Dirk Hatteraick's Cave. Strangers who visit this place, the scenery of which is highly romantic, are also shown under the name of the Gaugers Loop, a tremendous precipice being the same, it is asserted, from which Kennedy was precipitated. Meg Merrilies is in Galloway considered as having had her origin in the traditions concerning the celebrated Flora Marshall, one of the royal consorts of Willie Marshall, more commonly called the Caird of Barrullian, king of the gypsies of the western lowlands. That potentate was himself deserving of notice from the following peculiarities. He was born in the parish of Kirkmichael about the year 1671, and as he died at Kirkcudbright 23rd November 1792, he must then have been in the 120th year of his age. It cannot, he said, that this unusually long lease of existence was noted by any peculiar excellence of conduct or habits of life. Willie had been pressed or enlisted in the army 7 times, and had deserted as often, besides 3 times running away from the naval service. He had been 17 times lawfully married, and besides such a reason ably large share of matrimonial comforts, was after his 100th year the avowed father of 4 children. By less legitimate affections he subsisted in his extreme old age by a pension from the present Earl of Selkirk's grandfather. Will Marshall is buried in Kirkcudbright Church, where his monument is still shown, decorated with a scutcheon, suitably blazoned with 2 tups horns and 2 cutty spoons. In his youth, he occasionally took an evening walk on the highway with the purpose of assisting travellers, by relieving them of the weight of their purses. On one occasion, the Caird of Barrullian robbed the Laird of Bargally at a place between Carsfern and Dalmellington. His purpose was not achieved without a severe struggle, in which the gypsy lost his bonnet, and was obliged to escape, leaving it on the road. A respectable farmer happened to be the next passenger, and seeing the bonnet alighted took it up, and rather imprudently put it on his own head. At this instant Bargally came up with some assistance, and recognizing the bonnet, charged the farmer of Bantobrick with having robbed him, and took him into custody. There being some likeness between the parties, Bargally persisted in his charge, and though the respectability of the farmer's character was proved, or admitted, his trial before the circuit court came on accordingly. The fatal bonnet lay on the table of the court. Bargally swore that it was the identical article worn by the man who robbed him, and he and others likewise deponed that they had found the accused on the spot where the crime was committed with the bonnet on his head. The case looked gloomily for the prisoner, and the opinion of the judge seemed unfavourable, but there was a person in the court who knew well both who did and who did not commit the crime. This was the Caird of Barrullian, who, thrusting himself up to the bar near the place where Bargally was standing, suddenly seized on the bonnet, put it on his head, and looking the Laird full in the face, asked him with a voice which attracted the attention of the court and crowded audience, "Look at me, sir, and tell me by the oath you have sworn I am not I the man who robbed you between Carsfern and Dalmellington." Bargally replied in great astonishment, "By heaven, you are the very man. You see what sort of memory this gentleman has," said the volunteer pleader. "He swears to the bonnet, whatever features are under it. If you yourself, my lord, will put it on your head, he will be willing to swear that your lordship was the party who robbed him between Carsfern and Dalmellington." The tenant of Bantobrick was unanimously acquitted, and thus Willie Marshall ingeniously contrived to save an innocent man from danger, without incurring any himself, since Bargalley's evidence must have seemed to every one too fluctuating to be relied upon. While the king of the gypsies was thus laudably occupied, his royal consort Flora contrived, it is said, to steal the hood front the judge's gown, for which offence, combined with her presumptive guilt as a gypsy, she was banished to New England, whence she never returned. Now I cannot grant that the idea of Meg Merrilies was in the first concoction of the character derived from Flora Marshall, seeing I have already said she was identified with Jean Gordon, and as I have not the Laird of Bargalley's apology for charging the same fact on two several individuals, yet I am quite content that Meg should be considered as a representative of her sect and class in general, Flora, as well as others. The other instances in which my Galavidian readers have obliged me by assigning to nothing to a local habitation and a name, shall also be sanctioned so far as the author may be entitled to do so. I think the facetious Joe Miller records a case pretty much in point where the keeper of a museum, while showing, as he said, the very sword with which Balaam was about to kill his ass, was interrupted by one of the visitors who reminded him that Balaam was not possessed of a sword, but only wished for one. True, sir, replied the ready-witted Cicerone, but this is the very sword he wished for. The author, in application of this story, has only to add that, though ignorant of the coincidence between the fictions of the tale and some real circumstances, he is contented to believe, he must unconsciously have thought or dreamed of the last while engaged in the composition of Guy Mannering.